She was the last woman standing, unwanted, overlooked, invisible. At 31, Clara Whitmore had survived 6 rejections, watching younger women claimed while she faded into dust and silence. This frontier platform would be her graveyard of dreams. But when the richest rancher in the territory arrived late, covered in trail dirt and commanding respect without asking, he didn't choose the beautiful ones. He walked straight past every hopeful face and stopped in front of her. The crowd gasped. Clara's heart stopped. And in that single moment, everything she believed about her worth shattered completely. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's journey travels across this world. The September sun hung merciless over Dawson Creek, turning the wooden platform into a griddle of broken dreams. Clara Whitmore stood at the far end, her worn carpet bag clutched between gloved hands that had long since stopped trembling. At 31, she'd learned to stand perfectly still when hope was dying, learned not to flinch, not to let her face reveal the crumbling inside. 6 times before, she'd stood on platforms like this one. 6 times, she'd been passed over. The math was simple, brutal, and absolute. In 1878, a woman her age, without means, without family, without the soft prettiness that made men's eyes light up, that woman was a ghost already. The frontier had no use for ghosts, no matter how capable their hands or sharp their minds. Ladies, please form a line according to your registration numbers. Mrs. Hendricks, the stern-faced coordinator from the Women's Settlement Society, moved down the platform with a clipboard and the kind of efficiency that left no room for sentiment. Gentlemen will begin viewing at 2:30. Remember, you are here as prospective brides, not cattle. Maintain your dignity. Clara almost laughed at that. Dignity. As if dignity put food on a table or kept a roof overhead. As if dignity meant anything when desperation carved itself into your bones. She took her place at the end of the line, position number 12 out of 13. Unlucky from the start. To her right stood Emma Thornhill, a wisp of a girl barely 19 with golden hair that caught the sunlight like spun sugar. Emma's hands shook as she smoothed her Sunday dress, and Clara felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness toward this trembling creature who still believed in fairy tales. "First time?" Clara asked quietly. Emma nodded, not meeting her eyes. "Yes, ma'am. My father passed last winter. Farm got sold for debts. I got nowhere else." "You'll be fine," Clara said, and meant it. Girls like Emma always got chosen. It was women like Clara, too old, too plain, too obviously used up by life's harsh handling, who rode the rails from town to town, hope bleeding out a little more with each mile. "Have you done this before?" Emma's voice was small, curious. "Once or twice," Clara lied. No need to terrify the girl with the truth. No need to explain what it felt like to stand silent and still while men's eyes slid past you like you were made of air, landing instead on younger faces, smoother skin, the promise of easy fertility and uncomplicated futures. The platform filled with women, some desperate, some hopeful, some wearing the same hollow expression Clara saw in her mirror each morning. The smell of cheap perfume mixed with fear sweat hung in the hot air. Somewhere down the line, a woman was crying softly. Another was praying under her breath. Clara did neither. She'd cried herself empty 3 years ago. And prayer? Prayer was for people who still believed someone was listening. Mrs. Hendricks clapped her hands. "Gentlemen are approaching. Stand straight. Smile naturally. Do not speak unless spoken to. Remember, you represent not just yourselves, but the entire Women's Settlement Society program." The men came in a cluster, boots heavy on the wooden planks. Clara counted 15 of them, ranchers, shopkeepers, farmers, a blacksmith still wearing his leather apron. They moved down the line with varying degrees of interest, some bashful, some bold, all of them evaluating horseflesh disguised as matrimony. It happened exactly as Clara knew it would. The first man, a solid-looking farmer named Hutchins, stopped in front of Emma. "Name?" "Emma Thornhill, sir." "You cook?" "Yes, sir, and sew, and keep house, and—" "That'll do." He raised his hand, the signal of selection. "Mrs." Hendricks marked her clipboard with sharp efficiency. Emma let out a small gasp of relief, and Clara felt genuinely glad for her. One less soul drowning in the deep water of uncertainty. The selection continued. A quiet brunette named Sarah went to a shopkeeper. A plump, cheerful woman named Molly was claimed by a rancher who looked kind. One by one, hands rose, names were marked, futures were decided in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Clara stood perfectly still. Men's eyes touched her face and slid away, quick as minnows. Too old, too thin, too something that didn't match what they'd imagined when they wrote to the society asking for a wife. She saw it in their faces, the small disappointment, the barely concealed calculation that maybe the next woman would be better, younger, more worth the investment of a name and a home. By 3 o'clock, only 3 women remained unchosen. Clara, a hard-faced woman named Margaret, who'd cursed loudly at one potential suitor, and Ruth, a widow of 45 who stood with the patience of someone who'd already survived worse than rejection. The remaining men, 2 of them, looked uncomfortable. One was ancient, probably 70, with tobacco-stained whiskers and hands that shook. The other was barely 20, pimpled and nervous, clearly having scraped together every dollar for the registration fee. The old man approached Margaret, who crossed her arms and glared him into retreat. The boy approached Ruth, took one look at her age-weathered face, and backed away stuttering apologies. Neither looked at Clara. It was finished. Mrs. Hendricks consulted her clipboard with the expression of a woman calculating acceptable losses. "Ladies, I'm afraid I got money for the return fare," Margaret interrupted. "Don't need your charity speech." "As do I," Ruth said quietly. "Thank you for the opportunity." Clara said nothing. She had $17 folded in her pocket, enough to get her to Denver, maybe San Francisco if she was careful. Enough to start over one more time in some new city where no one knew her as the woman who couldn't even get chosen on a frontier bride platform. "Very well," Mrs. Hendricks marked her clipboard with what might have been relief. "The afternoon train departs at 5. The society wishes you all the best in your future endeavors." Future endeavors. What a bloodless way to describe the slow starvation of hope. Clara reached for her carpet bag, muscles moving with the numbness that came after you'd bled out all feeling. She would walk to the station, buy her ticket, ride west into the setting sun and whatever waited there. Another city, another position as a seamstress or laundress or companion to some demanding old woman. Another few years of invisibility before age and poverty finished what rejection had started. It was fine. She was used to it. The platform was clearing now, chosen women gathering their few possessions while their new husbands waited with varying degrees of patience. Emma caught Clara's eye and started to move toward her, sympathy written across her young face. Clara turned away. She couldn't bear kindness right now. Couldn't bear the well-meaning pity of someone whose future had just opened like a flower while Clara's closed like a fist. She took 3 steps toward the stairs leading down from the platform. And then she heard it. The thunder of hooves hitting hard-packed dirt at full gallop. The shouts of men scrambling out of the way. The explosive energy of something powerful and unstoppable bearing down on the platform with absolute determination. Clara turned. Everyone turned as a massive bay stallion slid to a halt in a spray of dust and gravel. The rider dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, boots hitting ground with decisive purpose. Jonah Mercer. Even Clara, new to this town, knew the name. Everyone knew the name. The most successful rancher in 3 territories, owner of the largest spread in the valley. A man whose word carried weight in territorial politics and whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. He was also late. Very late. Jonah Mercer stood at least 6'3", broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who worked hard every day of their lives. Trail dust covered his clothes, a fine gray coating that spoke of hard riding. His hat was pushed back, revealing dark hair silvered at the temples, and a face that harsh weather and harder years had carved into angles and planes. Maybe 40, maybe older. It was impossible to tell with men like this, men who'd been forged by sun and wind and circumstances that killed softer people. His eyes swept the platform. Gray eyes, the color of storm clouds, taking in the scene with intelligence that missed nothing. "I'm here for the bride selection," he said, voice carrying without being loud. "I know I'm late. Train got delayed by a washout north of here. I sent word ahead, but—" "Mr. Mercer." Mrs. Hendricks recovered her composure with visible effort. We've already completed the selection process. I'm afraid—" "You telling me every woman here got chosen?" His eyes moved across the platform, cataloging what was obvious. The departing couples, the three women who remained, the way Margaret and Ruth had already picked up their bags to leave, the way Clara stood frozen, unable to look away from him. "There are still some ladies available," Mrs. Hendricks said carefully. "However, given your standing in the community, I'm certain we could arrange for a special selection from our next group arriving in." "Don't need a special selection." Jonah's gaze had settled on the three remaining women, studying each with the same careful attention he'd probably given to purchasing horses or evaluating land. Not cruel, but thorough. Assessing. Margaret lifted her chin defiantly. Ruth simply looked tired. And Clara. Clara felt her heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird, even though she knew better than to hope, knew better than to imagine. Jonah started walking. Past Mrs. Hendricks, who reached out as if to stop him, then thought better of it. Past the small cluster of remaining townspeople who'd stayed to watch the spectacle. Past Margaret, who watched him with narrow-eyed suspicion. Past Ruth, who didn't even look up. He stopped directly in front of Clara. The world contracted to the space between one breath and the next. Clara could smell horse and leather and the clean sweat of hard riding, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. The scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his hands, work-roughened, capable hands, hung loose at his sides without aggression or threat. "Name?" he asked. Her voice came from somewhere far away. "Clara Whitmore." "Age?" She could have lied, should have lied, but something in those storm-gray eyes demanded truth. 31. A murmur rippled through the watching crowd. 31. Too old, past her prime. What could he possibly want with, "You been passed over today?" Jonah asked. The bluntness of it should have hurt. Instead, Clara felt a strange relief at someone finally saying the obvious thing out loud. "Yes." "How many times before this?" 6. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition of a particular kind of pain. "You keep trying anyway." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered. "I keep trying." Why? Such a simple word. Such an impossible question. Why did she keep subjecting herself to this ritual humiliation? Why didn't she just accept invisibility and fade quietly into whatever marginal existence society deemed appropriate for women like her? "Because the alternative is worse," Clara said. Jonah studied her for another long moment. The platform had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. "You cook?" he asked. "Yes." "Clean, sew, keep a house?" "Yes." "Read and write?" "Yes, I was a school teacher before—" She stopped. Before her father died owing money to everyone in town. Before the school board decided a woman with debts and no family wasn't a suitable influence on children. Before everything fell apart. Before what? Before circumstances changed. He nodded slowly, accepting this non-answer as answer enough. "I got a ranch 15 miles north of here, biggest spread in the valley, 15,000 acres, good water, cattle, and horses. It's hard work. I need a partner, not a decoration. Someone with spine and sense. Someone who won't fold the first time things get difficult." Clara's throat had gone dry. She managed to nod. "I ain't looking for a girl who needs protecting from reality," Jonah continued, pitching his voice low enough that only Clara could hear, though the crowd was definitely straining to listen. "I'm looking for a woman who's already survived it. You understand the difference?" "Yes," Clara whispered. "I'm 42 years old, widower. Wife died 4 years back in childbirth, baby with her. I got a house that needs a woman's touch and a life that needs sharing. I work hard. I drink occasionally, but not to excess. And I keep my word once given. I'd expect the same from a wife." This was happening. This was actually happening. Clara's hands had started trembling again, but differently now. Not from fear of rejection, but from the terrifying possibility of acceptance. "I ain't a young man anymore," Jonah said. "And you ain't a young woman. Maybe that's not a disadvantage. Maybe that means we both know what we're getting into." He stepped back slightly, giving her space, and raised his voice so the whole platform could hear. "Clara Whitmore, would you be willing to court with the intention of marriage?" The platform erupted. Shocked whispers became open exclamations. Mrs. Hendricks actually gasped. Someone in the crowd said, "But she's..." and someone else shushed them violently. Emma Thornhill had tears running down her face, her hand pressed to her mouth. Margaret snorted something that might have been approval. And Clara looked into the storm-gray eyes of Jonah Mercer and saw something she'd never seen before in a man's face when he looked at her. Not pity, not resignation, not the disappointed calculation of someone settling for less than they wanted, but respect. Raw, honest respect for someone who'd been knocked down 7 times and gotten back up every single time. "Yes," Clara heard herself say. "I'd be willing to court." Jonah nodded once, decisive. He turned to Mrs. Hendricks, who still looked faintly stunned. "What's the proper procedure?" Well, there's a week's supervised courtship, separate accommodations naturally, chaperone meetings to determine compatibility. If both parties agree at the end of the week, marriage can proceed with the society's blessing." "Fine. Where's she staying?" "The society maintains rooms at Mrs. Brennan's boarding house I'll cover her expenses." Jonah pulled a leather wallet from his pocket, counted out bills with the ease of a man to whom money was a tool, not a worry. "1 week. That enough?" "More than sufficient, Mr. Mercer." He handed the money to Mrs. Hendricks, then turned back to Clara. "I'll call on you tomorrow morning at 9. We'll talk properly then. That acceptable?" "Yes," Clara managed. "Good." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that acknowledged her as worthy of courtesy, and walked back to his horse with the same decisive energy he'd brought to the platform. The crowd parted for him automatically. Men who'd ignored Clara minutes ago now watched her with newfound speculation. Women who'd dismissed her now whispered behind gloved hands. Jonah mounted his stallion in one smooth motion, wheeled the horse around, and rode off in the same cloud of dust he'd arrived in. And just like that, he was gone. Clara stood motionless, her carpetbag still clutched in numb hands, trying to process what had just happened. Around her, the platform had exploded into conversation, speculation, gossip, outright disbelief mixing into a roar of voices that barely penetrated the ringing in her ears. "Well," Mrs. Hendricks said, recovering her professional demeanor with visible effort, "that was highly irregular. But Mr. Mercer is a respected member of the community, and his offer was made in good faith. Miss Whitmore, if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your accommodations." Clara nodded mutely and followed. Behind her, she heard Margaret's rough voice cutting through the chatter. About damn time someone had the sense to pick quality over packaging. And Ruth's quiet addition. "Some men know what they're looking for. Rest are just fools shopping for pretty." Emma caught up with Clara as they descended the platform stairs, grabbing her hand and squeezing tight. "Oh, Miss Clara, Mr. Mercer, he's the wealthiest man in the territory. And he chose you. Isn't it wonderful?" Clara looked at the girl's shining face and felt something crack open in her chest. Not quite hope. She'd learned better than that. But something close to it. Something dangerous and terrifying and utterly necessary. "Ask me in a week," she said softly, "when I know if it's real." Mrs. Brennan's boarding house was a tidy 2-story structure on the respectable end of Dawson Creek's main street. The proprietress herself was a compact woman of 60, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a brisk efficiency that reminded Clara of a particularly organized bird. "You're the one Jonah Mercer chose," Mrs. Brennan said, leading Clara up the narrow stairs. Not a question. In a town this size, news traveled faster than wildfire. "Yes, ma'am." "Surprised everyone, I'll wager. Including me." Mrs. Brennan glanced back, and something that might have been approval flickered across her lined face. "Jonah's got good sense when he uses it. Lost his way for a while after Catherine died, but he steadied back out. You could do far worse." She opened a door to a small but clean room, bed, dresser, washstand, a single window overlooking the street. Simple, but compared to some of the places Clara had stayed, it was practically luxurious. "Supper's at 6 sharp, Mrs." Brennan continued. "There's 5 other women boarding here currently. 3 are married already, waiting for their husbands to finish building homes. The other 2 are still in courtship. You'll meet them at dinner. Water for washing is brought up at 4. Chamber pot under the bed. Privy out back if you need it at night. Any questions?" "No, ma'am." "Thank you." Mrs. Brennan paused at the door. "Jonah Mercer's a good man, Miss Whitmore. Hard, but fair. He'll expect a partner, not a servant. Think you can manage that?" Clara met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I've been managing on my own for 7 years, Mrs. Brennan. I think I can manage with help." "Good answer." Mrs. Brennan nodded and left, pulling the door closed behind her. Alone finally, Clara set her carpet bag on the bed and sat down beside it. Her legs had started shaking, delayed reaction setting in now that she was safe from watching eyes. She gripped her knees and tried to breathe steadily through the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. He chose her. Jonah Mercer, the richest rancher in 3 territories, had walked past every other woman and chosen her. Why? The question circled like a vulture. Men like that didn't choose women like her unless there was a reason, an angle, something that made sense of the incomprehensible. Clara had learned young that nothing good came without a price, and kindness was usually a mask for something darker underneath. But what could he possibly want from her that he couldn't get from any of the younger, prettier women who would have fallen over themselves for the chance to be Mrs. Jonah Mercer? She stood abruptly, needing movement to quiet the chaos in her mind. The window drew her, and she looked out over Dawson Creek's modest main street. A few wagons moved lazily through the dust. A dog slept in a patch of shade. Normal life continuing as if Clara's entire world hadn't just been picked up and shaken like a snow globe. "Tomorrow morning at 9, he'd said. They would talk properly. Clara pressed her forehead against the sun-warmed glass and allowed herself one moment of raw honesty. She was terrified. Not of him specifically, though any smart woman was cautious around men she didn't know. But terrified of hoping. Terrified of believing this might be real, only to have it snatched away like every other good thing that had ever briefly touched her life. Terrified of investing any emotion in this impossible situation and being gutted when it inevitably fell apart. 7 times she'd stood on platforms and been passed over. 7 times she'd accepted rejection and moved on. What if the 8th time was different? What if this was the moment everything changed? And what if it wasn't? A knock on her door scattered her spiraling thoughts. Clara straightened, wiped her face, though she hadn't been crying, and opened the door to find Emma Thornhill standing in the hallway, still wearing her Sunday dress, eyes bright with suppressed excitement. "Miss Clara, I'm staying here too. Mr. Hutchins, my husband-to-be, he's got a farm 3 miles east, but it's not quite ready yet, so I'm boarding here for the week during courtship. Isn't it wonderful that we'll be together?" Clara couldn't help but smile at the girl's irrepressible enthusiasm. "Wonderful," she agreed, stepping back to let Emma into the small room. Emma bounced in and perched on the edge of the bed like an excited bird. "Tell me everything. What did Mr. Mercer say to you? Why did he choose you? Do you know anything about him? Is it true he owns 15,000 acres? Emma, slow down. I know barely more than you do. But you must know something. Everyone's talking about it. Sarah. She got chosen by Mr. Patterson, the shopkeeper. Sarah said her husband-to-be told her that Jonah Mercer could have had any woman in the territory. Women have been throwing themselves at him for years since his wife died, and he never looked at any of them. So why now? Why you?" Clara sat down next to Emma, the question hanging between them like smoke. "I don't know." "Maybe he saw something special in you," Emma said with the absolute certainty of someone young enough to still believe in fairy tales. "Maybe he recognized that you're different from all those silly girls." "I'm different because I'm old and plain," Clara said bluntly. "Let's not romanticize it. You're not old. 31 isn't old. In frontier marriage terms, it's ancient." Emma frowned, her young face serious. "Miss Clara, can I tell you something? When I was standing on that platform, before Mr. Hutchins chose me, I was watching you. You stood so straight, even when everyone was being chosen except you. You didn't cry or beg or make yourself small. You just stood there like you deserved to be there as much as anyone. And I thought if I can be half that strong when life gets hard, I'll be okay." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Emma, so maybe," the girl continued softly, "maybe Mr. Mercer saw the same thing I did. Maybe he saw someone strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him, someone who wouldn't break." Before Clara could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs, followed by Mrs. Brennan's voice calling that supper would be served in 15 minutes. Emma jumped up. "I should go change. But Miss Clara, I'm glad he chose you. I'm glad you're getting a chance." She slipped out, leaving Clara alone with thoughts that wouldn't settle. Someone strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him. Was that what Jonah Mercer had seen when he looked at her? Not a desperate woman to be pitied, but a potential partner with enough spine to weather whatever storms the frontier threw at them. It was a novel thought. Terrifying, but novel. Clara changed into her one decent dress, dark blue cotton, carefully mended, pressed as smooth as she could manage with a traveling iron. She pinned her dark hair into a neat bun, studying her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. 31 years old, lines beginning to form at the corners of her eyes and mouth. Skin that had lost the bloom of youth, but hadn't yet surrendered to age. A face that wouldn't turn heads in a crowd, but wouldn't frighten children either. Ordinary in every possible way, except for her eyes. Clara leaned closer to the mirror, examining eyes that had seen too much disappointment to be soft anymore. Gray-green, her mother had called them. Steady eyes. Eyes that met the world directly and didn't flinch away from hard truths. Maybe those were the eyes that Jonah Mercer had recognized. Maybe. Supper was served in Mrs. Brennan's dining room, a cheerful space with yellow curtains and enough seating for a dozen people. Clara found herself at a table with Emma, the two other courting women, Sarah and Molly, and the three already married women waiting for their homes to be completed. The conversation swirled around her, excited chatter about husbands and homes and futures opening like flowers. Clara picked at her pot roast and tried to contribute when directly addressed, but mostly she listened, feeling oddly separate from these women who seemed so certain that everything would work out perfectly. And Mr. Mercer's ranch is called the Triple Creek, one of the married women, a plump, cheerful person named Adelaide, was saying. Named for the 3 creeks that run through his property. They say his cattle are the finest in the territory, and his horses are legendary. People come from as far as California to buy his stock. I heard he's got 30 cowboys working for him, Sarah added, eyes wide. 30! Can you imagine managing a household that size? Catherine managed it, another married woman said quietly. This was Beth, older than the others, with sad eyes and careful hands. His first wife. She died 4 years ago, childbirth complications. A hush fell over the table. How awful, Emma whispered. They say he nearly died himself after, Beth continued. Not physically, but in spirit. Locked himself away on the ranch for months. Wouldn't see anyone, wouldn't come to town. His foreman practically ran everything while Jonah grieved. Clara's fingers tightened on her fork. A man who'd loved his wife enough to nearly break when he lost her. What did that man want with a bride acquired from a platform of desperate women? But he recovered, Adelaide said firmly, clearly uncomfortable with the dark turn of conversation. He's a pillar of the community now, serves on the territorial council, helps settle disputes, contributes to the school and church. A good man. A lonely man, Beth said softly, looking directly at Clara. There's a difference between recovering and healing. He recovered. I don't think he's healed. The words settled like stones in Clara's chest. After supper, she retreated to her room and tried to read a book she'd carried through 6 failed attempts at starting over, but the words wouldn't stick. Her mind kept circling back to storm-gray eyes and a voice that had asked why she kept trying. Because the alternative is worse. Had that been the right answer? Or had she revealed too much desperation? 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. 12 hours away. Clara undressed and lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling for the night. Footsteps in the hallway. Low voices. Someone laughing. The ordinary sounds of other people's lives moving forward while hers hung suspended in uncertainty. She thought about praying but couldn't find the words. She thought about planning what she'd say to Jonah Mercer but couldn't predict what questions he'd ask. Finally, as exhaustion pulled her toward sleep, Clara allowed herself one small, dangerous thought. What if this time was different? What if, after 7 rejections, the 8th time was the one that stuck? What if 31 wasn't too old, and plain wasn't too plain, and all the broken pieces of her life could somehow be rebuilt into something whole? The thought terrified her more than any rejection ever had, because rejection she knew how to survive. But hope? Hope could destroy her completely. Clara closed her eyes and let sleep take her, not knowing whether she was running towards something wonderful or something that would finally, completely, break her beyond all repair. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, she'd find out which. Morning arrived with relentless efficiency, sunlight cutting through Clara's window and dragging her from fitful dreams into the sharp reality of what today meant. She'd slept in fragments, waking every hour to check the small clock on the dresser, watching time crawl toward 9 o'clock with the inevitability of water running downhill. By 7, she'd given up on sleep entirely. By 8, she'd washed, dressed in her best day clothes, a gray cotton dress with modest white collar that had seen better years but was clean and carefully pressed, and pinned her hair 3 different ways before settling on the simple bun that made her look competent rather than decorative. Her hands shook as she worked, and she hated the trembling, hated the vulnerability it revealed. "You look lovely," Emma said from the doorway, making Clara jump. The girl was already dressed, pink-cheeked and glowing with the kind of happiness that came from believing the future held only good things. "I look presentable," Clara corrected, turning from the mirror. "There's a difference. Mr. Hutchins is calling on me at 10. We're taking a walk to see the farm." Emma practically bounced with excitement. "What are you and Mr. Mercer going to do?" "Talk, I imagine. That's generally what courtship involves." "Oh, but it's so romantic, the way he rode in like that, all dusty and commanding, and chose you in front of everyone." "Emma," Clara kept her voice gentle but firm, "please don't build fairy tales around this. It's a practical arrangement between 2 practical people, nothing more." The girl's face fell slightly, but she rallied with youthful optimism. "Maybe it starts practical and becomes something more. Isn't that how the best marriages work? My mother always said love that grows slow lasts longer than love that burns fast." Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Brennan's voice echoed up the stairs. "Miss Whitmore, gentleman caller in the parlor." 8:45. He was early. Clara's stomach clenched. She pressed one hand against her midsection, willing the nerves to settle, then straightened her spine and lifted her chin. Whatever happened in the next hour, she would face it directly. She'd survived worse than conversation with a rancher. The parlor was Mrs. Brennan's pride. Lace curtains, upholstered furniture that had seen better decades, a vase of wildflowers on the side table attempting to bring cheer to the formal space. Jonah Mercer stood by the window, hat in his hands, looking oddly out of place among the delicate furnishings like a wolf in a henhouse. He'd cleaned up since yesterday. The trail dust was gone, replaced by dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a leather vest that showed his broad shoulders to advantage. His hair was still damp from washing, swept back from a face that daylight revealed in sharper detail. Strong jaw, straight nose, those remarkable storm-gray eyes that turned toward her as she entered. "Miss Whitmore." He nodded, a gesture of respect that still felt foreign coming from a man addressing her. "Mr. Mercer." Clara moved into the room, hyper-aware of Mrs. Brennan hovering in the doorway as required chaperone. "You're early." "Old habit, rather be an hour early than a minute late." He gestured toward the settee. "Please, sit. We should talk." Clara sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them still. Jonah took the chair across from her, setting his hat on the side table with deliberate care. For a moment, silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either, the silence of 2 careful people trying to figure out how to begin. "I appreciate your directness yesterday," Jonah said finally. "Most women would have prettied up the truth. You didn't." "Didn't seem much point in it." "No." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "I value honesty, Miss Whitmore. In business, in friendship, and especially in marriage. So I'm going to be direct with you now, and I'd appreciate the same in return." Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Go ahead." "I'm 42 years old. I've built my ranch from nothing. Started with 500 acres and 24 cattle 15 years ago. Worked myself half to death to turn it into what it is now. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, but I'm also realistic about what it cost me." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped between them. "My first wife, Catherine, she was 18 when we married. Sweet girl, good-hearted, but she wasn't prepared for the reality of frontier ranching. The isolation broke something in her long before the childbirth complications killed her." Clara heard Mrs. Brennan shift uncomfortably in the doorway, but she kept her eyes on Jonah's face. This wasn't romantic courtship talk. This was something rawer, more honest. "I'm not looking to repeat that mistake," Jonah continued. "I don't need a girl who thinks ranch life is an adventure. I need a woman who understands it's hard work, lonely sometimes, and nothing like the stories in ladies' magazines. Someone who won't resent me when reality doesn't match expectation." "What makes you think I'm that woman?" Clara asked quietly. "You don't know me." I know you've been passed over 7 times and you're still standing. I know you're 31 and still trying instead of giving up. That tells me you've got grit." His eyes held hers, unflinching. "And yesterday, when I asked why you kept trying, you said the alternative was worse. That's honest. That's real. That's someone who understands how hard the world can be." "So you chose me because I've failed repeatedly?" The words came out sharper than intended, edged with old pain. "I chose you because you survived failing repeatedly," Jonah corrected. "There's a difference. The ranch will test you, Miss Whitmore. Weather, isolation, hard work, disappointments. I need someone who won't fold at the first difficulty. Your history suggests you don't fold." It was the strangest compliment Clara had ever received, and yet it settled into her chest with unexpected warmth. Not "you're pretty" or "you seem nice," but "you don't fold," as if resilience was worth more than a pleasing face or gentle disposition. "What exactly would you expect from a wife?" she asked. Partnership. The word came without hesitation. Someone to help run the household, manage supplies, keep books if you're capable. The ranch employs 30 men year-round, more during roundup and branding seasons. They need feeding, injuries tended, disputes settled. Catherine found it overwhelming. I'd need someone who could handle it. "I kept books for my father's general store until he died," Clara said. "I can manage accounts, and I've cooked for church suppers feeding 50 people. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Mercer." "Jonah," he said, "if we're courting with intent to marry, you should call me Jonah." "Then you should call me Clara." He nodded, and for the first time, something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Fair enough. Clara, then, what do you need to know about me?" The question caught her off guard. Men didn't usually ask what she needed. "Why now?" she asked. "From what I understand, you've been alone 4 years. Women have been available. Why choose a bride from a platform?" Jonah was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where morning sunlight painted patterns on the floor. "My foreman's been after me for 2 years to remarry. Says the ranch needs a woman's presence, that I'm getting too set in solitary ways. I resisted because I didn't want to court some young thing looking for romance and excitement. Then he suggested the bride platform. Figured women coming out here knew what frontier life meant. They'd have realistic expectations. And you were late. Train wash out north of here. By the time I got the wire about the delay and rode hard to make it, I figured I'd missed everything." He looked back at her. "Maybe that was better. Let the men looking for pretty young brides make their choices, left behind women who'd already proven they could handle disappointment." "That's a cold way to look at it." "It's an honest way to look at it." No apology in his voice. "I'm not offering you a love match, Clara. I'm offering you security, respect, a home, and a purpose. In return, I'm asking for competence, honesty, and partnership. If you're looking for romance and passion, you should say so now, and we'll part cordially." Clara met his eyes directly. "I stopped believing in romance 7 platforms ago, Jonah. I'm looking for exactly what you're offering. Security and purpose. A life that means something beyond counting pennies and wondering where the next position will come from." "Then we might suit each other well, Mrs. Brennan cleared her throat from the doorway. "Mr. Mercer, if you're planning to continue this conversation, perhaps a walk would be appropriate. With proper supervision, of course." Jonah stood, offering his hand to Clara. "Would you walk with me? I'd like to show you the town, introduce you to some people. Let folks start getting used to the idea of you." Clara took his hand, calloused, warm, steady, and rose. "That seems practical." They walked Main Street with Mrs. Brennan trailing 10 paces behind, a chaperone both dutiful and discreet. The morning was warming into the kind of crisp autumn day that made the sky look impossibly blue. Dawson Creek was waking up around them, shops opening, people beginning their daily routines. And every single person they passed stopped to stare. Clara felt the weight of their eyes, heard whispers spreading like ripples in water. There goes Jonah Mercer, with that woman he chose. The old one. What's he thinking? She kept her spine straight and her expression neutral, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. "Ignore them," Jonah said quietly, tucking her hand into the crook of his elbow with casual possessiveness. "Small town, big news. They'll find something else to gossip about by next week." You don't mind them talking about you. I mind if they're disrespectful to you. Otherwise, people can think what they like. I know my own mind. They stopped at Patterson's general store, where Sarah's new husband looked up from arranging canned goods with obvious curiosity. Jonah nodded to him. Morning, James. This is Clara Whitmore. We're courting. James Patterson's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline, but he recovered quickly. Miss Whitmore, welcome to Dawson Creek. His gaze slid to Jonah with unspoken questions. Need to get Clara some supplies, Jonah continued, ignoring the speculation. Good walking boots, work gloves, riding clothes if you've got them. Bill to my account. Riding clothes? Clara asked. Ranch is 15 miles from town. You'll need to know how to ride. He turned back to James. And a proper hat. Sun out there will burn her to blisters without one. Clara felt something shift inside her chest. He was outfitting her for his life, making practical preparations as if her acceptance was certain. Not arrogant exactly, but confident. A man used to making decisions and having them stick. I can't let you buy me things before we're— Consider it an investment, Jonah interrupted. Whether you decide to marry me or not, you'll need proper gear for ranch visits this week. Practical, not personal. James was already pulling items from shelves, sturdy boots, leather gloves, a wide-brimmed hat that would actually protect against weather. Clara watched the pile grow with mixed feelings. Part of her wanted to protest the expense, the presumption. Another part, the practical part that had kept her alive through 7 years of struggle, recognized generosity when she saw it. Try these on, Jonah said, handing her the boots. Make sure they fit right. You'll be doing a lot of walking. Clara sat on the stool James provided and unlaced her worn shoes. The new boots were beautiful, soft leather, good construction, the kind of quality she couldn't have afforded in 5 years of saving. They fit perfectly. Good, Jonah said when she stood and tested them. Keep them on. Leave your old ones. James, add a heavy coat to that order. Winters here are brutal. Mr. Mercer, Jonah, this is too much. He looked at her steadily. Is it too much if you're going to be my wife? Is it too much to make sure you're properly equipped for the life I'm asking you to share? Put that way, Clara couldn't argue. She nodded slowly, accepting the strange reality that this man was already treating her as if she belonged to him. Not as property, but as someone whose well-being mattered to his plans. They left Patterson's with Clara, wearing her new boots, James's curious stare burning into her back. Mrs. Brennan had engaged James's wife in conversation, giving Clara and Jonah a brief moment of relative privacy as they stepped onto the boardwalk. People are going to talk, Clara said quietly, about the age difference, about why you chose me, about whether you're good enough? Jonah's voice held an edge. Let them question. I don't answer to town gossip, and neither will you once you're my wife. If I become your wife? When? He said it with calm certainty. Unless you're having second thoughts? Clara stopped walking, forcing him to stop as well. They stood in the morning sunlight, and she studied his face, the lines that pain and work had carved, the eyes that had seen loss and survived it, the mouth that seemed unused to smiling but capable of honesty. I need you to understand something, she said carefully. I've been desperate before. I've made bad choices because desperation makes you grab at anything that looks like salvation. I don't want to do that again. What do you want? I want to make a clear-headed decision about whether we actually suit each other, not whether you're my last chance, or whether I should be grateful someone finally chose me, whether we, specifically, can build something real together. Jonah considered this, then nodded slowly. That's fair. That's smart even. So what do you need from me this week to make that decision? Honesty. About your life, your expectations, your temperament, and time to see whether I can actually manage what you're asking of me. Done. He resumed walking, Clara falling into step beside him. Tomorrow, you'll come to the ranch. Stay the day, meet my foreman and some of the hands, see what the work actually involves. If it's not what you can handle, better to know now. And if I decide it's not, then I'll shake your hand, thank you for your time, and wish you well in whatever you do next. No hard feelings, no obligations. I'm not interested in trapping anyone into a life they'll hate. The simplicity of it was almost shocking. No pressure, no manipulation, just a straightforward offer and the freedom to refuse. Clara had dealt with enough men to know how rare that was. They walked in silence for a while, making a circuit of the small town. Jonah pointed out landmarks: the church where services were held every Sunday, the doctor's office run by a competent if somewhat drunk physician named Hadley, the blacksmith who did excellent work when sober. He introduced her to people they met with the same straightforward announcement: "This is Clara Whitmore. Recording." Each time Clara watched faces register surprise, speculation, sometimes poorly concealed judgment. Women's eyes raked over her, cataloging her age, her plain dress, trying to understand what Jonah Mercer saw in such an unremarkable woman. Men's reactions varied from respectful nods to barely concealed smirks. "Does it bother you?" she asked after the fifth such encounter. "What they're thinking. They're thinking I picked a woman instead of a girl. They're thinking I used my brain instead of my—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Instead of baser considerations. Let them think whatever they want. 6 months from now, when you're running my household better than anyone expected, they'll be singing different songs." The confidence in his voice was both reassuring and terrifying. He seemed to have no doubt that she would succeed, that she would become his wife, that everything would work out according to his plan. Clara wasn't used to anyone having that much faith in her capabilities. They returned to Mrs. Brennan's boarding house as noon approached. The chaperone excused herself to help with lunch preparations, leaving Clara and Jonah in the parlor again, this time with the door properly open and voices from the kitchen providing acceptable supervision. "Tomorrow at 8, Jonah said, preparing to leave. "I'll bring a horse for you. Can you ride?" "I learned as a girl, but it's been years." "It'll come back. Horses are like letters. You don't forget once you know how." He picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. "Clara, I want you to think about something tonight." "What's that?" "Whether you can see yourself beside me long term, not just managing the household or keeping books, but actually building a life. Because that's what I'm offering. Not just marriage, but genuine partnership. I make the final decisions on ranch business, but I want a wife who'll speak her mind, who'll tell me when I'm being foolish, who'll pull her weight as an equal." His eyes held hers intently. "Can you do that? Can you stand beside a man like me without getting lost in his shadow?" Clara thought about the 7 platforms, the 7 rejections, the 7 times she'd swallowed her pride and her voice to make herself acceptable. She thought about the years of diminishing herself to fit into smaller and smaller spaces, hoping someone would finally find her worth keeping. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've spent so long trying to make myself smaller that I'm not sure I remember how to take up space anymore." "Then maybe it's time you learned again." Jonah settled his hat on his head. "I'll see you tomorrow morning, Clara. Wear those new boots. We've got ground to cover." He left, and Clara stood in the parlor, listening to his footsteps fade down the boardwalk, feeling as if she'd just agreed to something much larger than a simple courtship. Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "That man's serious about you," the older woman said. "I've known Jonah Mercer 10 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "How does he look at me?" "Like you're a puzzle he's determined to solve. Like you're something valuable he's afraid might slip through his fingers if he's not careful." Mrs. Brennan smiled. "Like someone worth fighting for." That night, Clara lay in bed unable to sleep, her mind replaying every word of the day's conversation. The other women in the boarding house were giddy with courtship excitement. Emma had walked with Mr. Hutchins and come back glowing. Sarah had picnicked with her shopkeeper. Molly had been given flowers by her rancher suitor. They all seemed so certain, so confident that everything would work out perfectly. Clara envied them that certainty while simultaneously distrusting it. Life had taught her that certainty was usually an illusion, that the ground could open beneath your feet when you least expected it. But Jonah hadn't offered certainty. He'd offered honesty, partnership, and the freedom to choose or refuse. That felt more real than all the romantic promises in the world. Clara rolled onto her side, watching moonlight paint silver squares on the floor, and tried to imagine herself as Mrs. Jonah Mercer. Tried to picture the ranch, the cattle, the men she'd be responsible for feeding and managing. Tried to envision a life where she wasn't invisible, wasn't an afterthought, wasn't constantly bracing for the next rejection. It was harder to imagine than she'd expected. Hope felt like a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. The next morning arrived clear and cold, autumn asserting itself with frost on the windows. Clara dressed in her new riding clothes, sturdy split skirt, practical blouse, the boots that still felt strangely luxurious on her feet. She braided her hair tightly and secured it at the nape of her neck, then settled the wide-brimmed hat on her head. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked competent, capable, like someone who belonged on a frontier ranch, like someone who might actually deserve to be chosen. Jonah arrived exactly at 8, leading 2 horses, his massive bay stallion and a smaller chestnut mare with gentle eyes. Mrs. Brennan insisted on a hearty breakfast first, feeding them both until Clara thought she might burst, then sent them off with a basket of food for midday and strict instructions to have Clara back before dark. "This is Rosie," Jonah said, indicating the mare. "She's even-tempered and forgiving. Good horse for someone getting back into riding." Clara approached the mare carefully, letting the horse sniff her hand before stroking the soft nose. "Hello, Rosie. Let's be friends." Mounting was awkward. Clara's muscles protested positions they hadn't assumed in years. But Jonah was patient, adjusting stirrups and offering quiet instruction until she sat reasonably secure in the saddle. The mare shifted beneath her, and Clara's hands tightened on the reins. "Relax," Jonah said from atop his stallion. "She can feel your tension. Just breathe and let your body remember." They started off at a walk, Dawson Creek falling away behind them as they headed north into open country. The land rolled away in every direction, grassland dotted with cattle, distant mountains painting purple shadows on the horizon, sky so vast it made Clara feel simultaneously insignificant and part of something enormous. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jonah asked, watching her face. "Terrifying," Clara answered honestly. "So much space. A person could get lost and never be found. Or a person could finally have room to breathe." He urged his stallion into an easy trot, and Clara's mare followed suit. "You'll get used to it. The space becomes freedom instead of fear." They rode for an hour, Clara's muscles screaming protest, but her stubbornness refusing to complain. Jonah pointed out landmarks, creek beds, property boundaries, the places where cattle like to gather. He explained the rhythm of ranch life, the seasonal work, the challenges of weather and market prices, and managing men who sometimes needed firm handling. "You ever fired anyone?" Clara asked. 3 times. Twice for drinking on the job, once for stealing. It's not pleasant, but sometimes necessary." "And you'd expect me to help make those decisions?" "I'd expect you to know the men well enough to have an opinion worth hearing. Final say would be mine, but I'm not interested in a wife who just nods and agrees with everything I say." Catherine did that. It meant I was making decisions without all the information. They crested a rise, and suddenly the ranch spread below them, a sprawling complex of buildings centered around a large 2-story house painted white with green shutters. Barns, corrals, bunkhouses, storage sheds, an entire small community organized around the business of raising cattle and horses. "That's home," Jonah said simply. Clara's breath caught. Home. When had she last had something she could call home? Not since her father died and creditors sold everything, leaving her with a carpetbag and $17 to start over somewhere, anywhere else. They rode down into the ranch yard, and immediately men appeared, cowboys stopping their work to stare at the woman riding beside their boss. Jonah ignored the attention, dismounting and helping Clara down with hands that steadied her when her legs wobbled. "Give yourself a minute," he said quietly. "First long ride after time away is always rough." A man in his 50s approached, bow-legged and weathered, with keen blue eyes that assessed Clara in one sweeping glance. "So this is her." "Clara, meet Sam Hastings, my foreman. Sam, this is Clara Whitmore, recording." Sam's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. "About damn time, boss. Begging your pardon, miss." "Clara's fine," she said, finding her land legs. "And no pardon needed for plain speaking." "She'll do," Sam said to Jonah, as if Clara wasn't standing right there. Then to Clara, "You cook?" "Yes." "Good. Cookie's been threatening to quit if someone doesn't improve the spice situation. Says Cowboy's got no appreciation for flavor." "I'll see what I can do." Jonah touched Clara's elbow, guiding her toward the house. "Let me show you inside, then we'll tour the rest and you can meet the hands properly." The house was larger than Clara expected. Rooms designed for function rather than elegance, but well-maintained and clean. The kitchen was huge, clearly built for feeding crowds, with a massive stove, long work tables, and storage that suggested serious meal preparation. The parlor held comfortable furniture worn from use, Upstairs, bedrooms stood mostly empty except for what was clearly Jonah's room and a smaller room he said belonged to Sam. Catherine decorated, Jonah said as they walked through spaces that felt oddly impersonal, like a hotel where someone once lived but left no real mark. Most of her things are packed away in the attic. I'd expect you to make this place your own, however you see fit. Clara ran her hand along a bare mantelpiece, imagining what could be. Curtains, personal touches, warmth that came from habitation rather than just occupation. It's a good house. Solid. Lonely, Jonah said bluntly. Hasn't felt like home since she died. Hoping the right woman could change that. They spent the rest of the day immersed in ranch life. Clara met the hands properly. 30 men of varying ages, most respectful if curious, a few openly skeptical of this plain woman their boss was courting. She watched cattle work, learned about horse breeding, sat in on a discussion about which fields to rest over winter. Jonah included her in everything, asking her opinion even when she had none, forcing her to engage rather than observe passively from the margins. At noon, they ate Mrs. Brennan's basket lunch sitting on a fence rail overlooking the south pasture. Jonah told her about Catherine, not glossing over the difficulties, but not dwelling in bitterness either. Clara found herself sharing things she rarely spoke about. Her father's failed business, her mother's death when Clara was 12, the slow accumulation of losses that had led her to 7 platforms and 7 rejections. You could have given up, Jonah said. After the second or third rejection, you could have just stopped trying. And done what? Worked myself to death in some city factory? Ended up in a poorhouse? Clara shook her head. At least this way I kept trying for something better. That's what I saw in you on that platform, Jonah said quietly. Someone still fighting when most people would have quit. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they rode back toward town. Clara's muscles ached fiercely, and she knew tomorrow would be brutal, but something inside her felt more settled. The ranch was real, the work was real, and Jonah's offer was exactly what he'd promised. Hard work, purpose, partnership. No false romance, but no deception either. Well? Jonah asked as Dawson Creek came into view. Honest thoughts? Clara considered carefully. It's more work than I've ever done. More responsibility than I've ever had. More space than I'm comfortable with yet. But I think I could learn to manage it. I think with time, I could become good at it. That's all I'm asking. Willingness to try. They reached Mrs. Brennan's as dusk painted the sky orange and purple. Jonah helped Clara dismount, steadying her when stiff muscles made her stumble. Tomorrow's Sunday, he said. Church services in the morning, then a community dinner afterward. I'll call for you at 9 if that's acceptable. Church? Clara hadn't been to services in years, had lost her faith somewhere between her third and fourth rejection. People will expect it, and it's a good way for them to see us together, start accepting the idea. He paused. Unless it makes you uncomfortable. No, I'll manage. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from stern to almost handsome. You'll do more than manage, Clara. I'm beginning to think you'll surprise us both. He rode away, and Clara climbed the boarding house steps, feeling as if she'd run a race and wasn't sure yet whether she'd won or lost. Emma met her at the door, bursting with questions, but Clara begged exhaustion and retreated to her room. Alone finally, she removed the boots and rubbed her aching feet, processing everything she'd seen and learned. The ranch was vast, the work endless, the responsibility staggering. Jonah was exactly what he'd presented himself as, hard, honest, looking for partnership rather than subservience. Could she do this? Could she really step into that life and make it her own? The alternative is worse. Her own words echoed back. What was the alternative, really? Another platform, another rejection, another slow slide into poverty and invisibility? Or taking this chance, this impossible chance, and seeing whether she could build something real from the ruins of 7 failures? Clara looked at her reflection in the darkening window. A woman in riding clothes, hair coming loose from its braid, face sun-touched and alive in a way it hadn't been in years. She looked like someone who'd spent a day doing real work, like someone who belonged somewhere, like someone who might actually have a future. The thought was terrifying. But standing there in the gathering dark, Clara made her decision. Not out of desperation, not because Jonah Mercer was her last chance, but because for the first time in 7 years, someone had looked at her and seen strength instead of failure, had offered her partnership instead of pity, had given her space to grow instead of shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. She would court him properly, give it the full week, complete honesty, real effort, and at the end, she would say yes, not to being rescued, but to building something together, to becoming the woman she'd almost forgotten she could be, to finally being chosen for exactly who she was. Sunday morning arrived with church bells ringing across Dawson Creek, their sound carrying through Clara's open window and pulling her from dreams of endless grassland and storm-gray eyes. She dressed with particular care, knowing that today she would face the entire community as Jonah Mercer's chosen woman. The scrutiny would be intense, the judgment swift, and there would be nowhere to hide from the whispers that followed a 31-year-old spinster who'd somehow captured the territory's most eligible widower. Her hands trembled as she pinned her hair, and she forced them steady through sheer will. She'd survived worse than gossip. She'd survived poverty and rejection and the slow erosion of hope. She could survive a few hours of small-town judgment. Emma knocked softly and entered without waiting for permission, her young face bright with excitement. "Oh, Miss Clara, you look so elegant. That dress is perfect." Clara glanced down at her Sunday best. Dark green cotton with modest black trim, the nicest thing she owned, but still painfully plain compared to what fashionable women wore. "It's old. It's dignified. You look like a rancher's wife already." Emma clasped her hands together, practically vibrating with romantic enthusiasm. "Mr. Hutchins says everyone's talking about you and Mr. Mercer. He says it's all anyone can discuss." "I'm sure." Clara kept her voice dry, fighting the urge to claim sudden illness and avoid the entire ordeal. "Some of the talk is mean," Emma admitted, her smile fading. "Mrs. Patterson, the shopkeeper's wife, she was saying yesterday that Mr. Mercer must be losing his faculties to choose someone so... Well, she didn't finish, but her meaning was clear. "Someone so old and plain," Clara finished flatly. "It's fine, Emma. I know what I am. You're strong and capable and exactly what he needs." Emma's fierce defense surprised Clara. "Those silly women with their pretty faces and empty heads, they wouldn't last a month on that ranch. But you? You'll build something real there. Anyone with eyes can see it." Before Clara could respond, Mrs. Brennan's voice called up the stairs, announcing Jonah's arrival. Clara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and descended to face whatever the day would bring. Jonah waited in the parlor wearing a dark suit that made him look even more formidable than usual, his hat in his hands and his expression unreadable. When he saw Clara, something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement that she'd made an effort. "You look well," he said simply. "Thank you. So do you." They walked to church side by side, and Clara felt the weight of watching eyes from every window they passed. People openly stared now, no longer bothering with pretense. She heard her name whispered, felt judgment rolling off the town like fog, thick and suffocating. Jonah seemed utterly unbothered. He guided her with a hand at her elbow, nodding pleasantly to people they passed, his demeanor that of a man completely comfortable with his choices and unconcerned with others' opinions. "How do you do it?" Clara asked quietly as they approached the small white church. "Not care what they think?" "Who says I don't care?" Jonah's voice was equally quiet. "I just care more about what I know to be true than what they assume to be true. There's a difference." The church was packed, every pew filled with families dressed in Sunday finery. A hush fell as Jonah and Clara entered, every head turning to stare. Clara felt her face heat, but she kept her chin up and her spine straight as Jonah led her to a pew near the front, his regular spot clearly, from the way people shifted to make room. They sat, and immediately the whispers started, rustling through the congregation like wind through dry leaves. Clara caught fragments. "Old enough to be one of his ranch hands. What's he thinking? Must be desperate." Poor Catherine would be mortified. Beside her, Jonah sat utterly still, his face carved from granite, giving no indication he heard any of it. Clara tried to match his composure, folding her hands in her lap and staring straight ahead at the simple altar. The service began, and for an hour Clara endured hymns and scripture readings, and a sermon about patience and faith that felt pointed, though the elderly pastor never looked directly at her. Throughout it all, she felt eyes boring into her back, felt the weight of speculation and judgment pressing down until she could barely breathe. When it finally ended, Clara wanted nothing more than to flee back to the boarding house and hide. But Jonah had other plans. He stood, offering his hand to help her up, and guided her outside where the entire congregation had gathered for the community dinner, tables set up under ancient oak trees, women laying out food while children ran shrieking between the adults. "Jonah!" A woman's voice, sharp and carrying. "A word, please." The speaker was perhaps 40, handsome in a hard way, wearing an expensive dress that seemed calculated to showcase wealth. She approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way, her eyes raking over Clara with barely concealed disdain. "Margaret," Jonah's voice was polite but cool. "Clara, this is Margaret Hastings, Sam's wife and one of the founding families of Dawson Creek." "Miss Whitmore," Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How interesting to finally meet you. The whole town has been simply fascinated by your situation." "Mrs. Hastings." Clara kept her voice level, refusing to show the discomfort churning in her stomach. "You must tell me," Margaret continued, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "how you managed to capture Jonah's attention. We've had so many lovely young women hoping for his notice these past years, and then you arrive and within a day—" She snapped her fingers. "It's quite remarkable." "Margaret," Jonah's voice held warning now. "I'm simply curious, Jonah. Surely you can understand our surprise. After all, you could have your pick of any woman in the territory, and instead you choose—" Her eyes traveled over Clara again, cataloging every flaw. "Well, it's unexpected." Clara felt anger building, hot and sharp, but before she could speak, Jonah stepped forward, placing himself slightly between them. His voice when he spoke was quiet but carried an edge that made several nearby conversations stop. "I chose a woman, Margaret. Not a girl playing at frontier life. I chose someone with enough spine to build a real partnership, not someone looking for an easy ride on my success. If that's unexpected to you, that says more about your understanding of what makes a good match than it does about my judgment." Margaret's face flushed red. "I didn't mean to imply—" "Yes, you did. And now I'm telling you, plain as I can make it, that any disrespect to Clara will be taken as disrespect to me. She's going to be my wife, which makes her one of the most important women in this territory, whether you like it or not. I suggest you adjust your attitude accordingly." The silence that followed was absolute. People within earshot had stopped pretending not to listen, openly staring now at the confrontation. Margaret's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed a stiff nod and hurried away, her expensive skirt swishing. Jonah turned to Clara, his expression softening slightly. "I'm sorry about that." "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did. Margaret's been trying to match me with her niece for 2 years. This is disappointment talking, but that doesn't make it acceptable." He guided Clara toward the food tables. "Come on, let's eat and remind these people that we're not going anywhere." The meal was an exercise in endurance. Clara sat at a table with Jonah, Sam, and Margaret Hastings, the latter silent and seething, and several other ranch families. Conversation flowed around her, occasionally directed at her in the form of pointed questions clearly designed to expose her inadequacies. "Do you have experience managing large households, Miss Whitmore?" one woman asked. "I've managed what I had. I learned quickly." "And you're comfortable with the isolation? The ranch is quite far from town." "I'm comfortable with my own company. I imagine I'll manage." "But at your age, don't you worry that—" The woman stopped, catching Jonah's warning glare. Sam, bless him, tried to redirect conversation to safer topics: weather, cattle prices, upcoming territorial elections. But the undercurrent remained, that constant questioning of what Jonah saw in Clara, why he'd chosen her, whether she was truly adequate for the role she was stepping into. Clara picked at her food, her appetite gone, fighting the urge to stand up and tell all these judgmental people exactly what she thought of their small-minded cruelty. But that would only confirm their worst assumptions about her, that she was common, unsuitable, not good enough for their precious Jonah Mercer. "You're doing fine," Jonah murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Just a few more hours, then we can leave." "I don't know how you've stood this for 4 years." "I mostly avoided town." His mouth quirked slightly. "One of many reasons I need a wife. Someone to handle the social obligations I'd rather skip." Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. "You're asking me to be your social shield?" "Among other things. Think you can manage it?" She looked around at the gathered families. The women who'd been subtly cruel, the men who'd questioned Jonah's judgment. I can manage anything if it means I don't have to be grateful for scraps anymore. Something fierce flashed in Jonah's eyes. Good. That's what I need to hear. After the meal, Jonah was pulled into conversations about ranch business, territorial politics, matters that Clara didn't understand yet, but would need to learn. She found herself standing awkwardly at the edge of groups, neither fully included nor entirely excluded, occupying that uncomfortable middle space of someone not yet accepted. Don't let them intimidate you. The voice came from behind her. Beth, one of the married women from the boarding house, her sad eyes kind. They're testing you, seeing if you'll crack under pressure. Is this what Catherine faced? Beth hesitated, then nodded. Worse, actually. She was so young, so overwhelmed by everything. They sensed weakness and circled like wolves. By the end, she barely left the ranch because facing town was too painful. And they think I'll do the same? Some do. Others figure you're tougher, since you've already survived so much. Beth studied Clara carefully. Which are you? The woman who'll fold, or the one who'll prove them all wrong? Clara thought about 7 platforms, 7 rejections, 7 times she'd picked herself up and tried again. She thought about the alternative, slow starvation of hope and purpose and dignity. She thought about Jonah's offer of partnership, of being seen as strong instead of broken. I'm the woman who doesn't fold, she said quietly. I can't afford to. Beth smiled, the first genuine warmth Clara had received from anyone except Emma. Then you'll do just fine. Give it 6 months. By spring, half these women will be asking your advice on household management, and the other half will be telling everyone they knew you were perfect for Jonah all along. The afternoon dragged on, and Clara felt her composure fraying with each whispered comment, each speculative glance, each barely concealed judgment. When Jonah finally suggested they take a walk, she nearly sagged with relief. They escaped the churchyard and walked toward the edge of town where buildings gave way to open land. The autumn air was crisp, smelling of wood smoke and distant rain. Clara breathed deeply, letting the space and silence wash away some of the tension coiled in her chest. That was brutal, Jonah said after they'd walked in silence for several minutes. Worse than I expected. Is it always like this? No. Usually people mind their own business better. But we're the biggest news this town's had in months, so everyone feels entitled to an opinion. He stopped walking, turning to face her. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Her stomach tightened. All right. Can you handle this? Not just today, but long term. Because this is part of the life I'm offering. Small-town politics, gossip, people who'll judge you for not being what they expected. It doesn't matter to me. I know my own mind and I stand by my choices. But it'll matter to you, having to face this every time we come to town. Clara considered lying, putting on a brave face, and pretending the day hadn't shaken her. But Jonah had asked for honesty, and she owed him that much. It's harder than I expected, she admitted. I thought I was past caring what people thought of me. Turns out, I'm not as tough as I believed. That's not weakness. That's being human. But can I handle it long term? Clara looked out over the grassland stretching toward distant mountains. I don't know. I want to say yes, that I'll develop thicker skin and stop caring. But honestly, I'm not sure. I've spent so long being invisible that being visible feels like standing naked in a town square. Jonah was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. You know what I see when I look at you? A mistake? A consolation prize? A woman past her prime who should be grateful for any attention? No. His voice was firm. I see someone who's been beaten down repeatedly and keeps standing back up. I see someone who tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable. I see someone with enough courage to face a hostile church congregation and not run crying. He paused. I see someone stronger than Catherine ever was, stronger than most people I know. Clara's throat tightened. You barely know me. I know enough. And Clara, here's what you need to understand. I'm not offering you this life because I think you'll be grateful. I'm offering it because I think we can build something real together, but only if you genuinely want it. Only if you're willing to stand beside me and face down all those judgmental people and tell them to go to hell through actions if not words. And if I can't, then we part ways with no hard feelings and I go looking for someone who can. I won't drag you into a life that'll make you miserable. His eyes held hers steadily. But I don't think you're the type to back down from a challenge. I think you're angry enough and stubborn enough to prove every single one of those people wrong. Clara felt something shift inside her, anger crystallizing into determination. He was right. She was angry, furious actually, at being judged and found wanting by people who knew nothing about her struggles, who'd never stood on a platform 7 times and been rejected, who'd never had to choose between dignity and survival. You're asking me to fight, she said slowly. I'm asking you to stand your ground. There's a difference. And you'll stand with me? When they question your judgment? When they keep whispering that I'm not good enough? Clara. Jonah's voice was steady as stone. I don't give a damn what they think. I care what you can do, what you're willing to build with me. Everything else is noise. She looked at this man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who saw strength where others saw failure, who was offering her not rescue but partnership. The anger in her chest mixed with something else, a fierce desire to prove everyone wrong, to become the woman he seemed to think she already was. All right, Clara said. I'll stand my ground. I'll face down their judgment, and I'll prove I belong at your side. But Jonah, I need you to promise me something. Name it. If I start to fail, if I'm truly not capable of this life, you'll tell me honestly. You won't let me keep struggling out of pity or obligation. Agreed. And I need the same from you. If you're miserable, if this life isn't what you hoped, you tell me straight. No suffering in silence, no pretending everything's fine when it's not. They shook hands on it, a formal gesture that felt more binding than any romantic promise. Clara felt the calluses on Jonah's palm, the strength in his grip, and understood that this was the foundation they were building: honesty, respect, and the willingness to face hard truths together. They walked back to town as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The church gathering was breaking up, families loading into wagons and heading home. People still stared, but Clara met their eyes now, refusing to look away or seem ashamed. Let them stare, let them whisper. She wasn't going anywhere. Jonah walked her back to Mrs. Brennan's boarding house as dusk settled over Dawson Creek. At the door, he paused, his expression serious. Tomorrow I need to ride to the north pasture, check on some pregnant mares. It's a full day's work, and I can't take you along. But Tuesday, I'd like you to come back to the ranch. Spend the day working with Cookie, learning the kitchen setup, meeting more of the hands. Can you do that? Yes? And Clara, after today, after facing all that judgment, are you still willing to see this courtship through? She met his storm gray eyes and saw genuine concern there, genuine care for her well-being beyond just his own needs. It steadied something inside her that had been shaking since the church service. I'm still willing, she said. Are you? Now that you've seen how people react to your choice? More certain than ever. He touched his hat brim. Get some rest. Tuesday will be hard work. After he left, Clara climbed to her room and found Emma waiting, bursting with questions about the day. Clara gave her a sanitized version, leaving out the worst of Margaret Hastings' cruelty, downplaying the constant judgment. But Emma was sharp enough to read between the lines. They were awful to you, weren't they? The girl's eyes filled with sympathetic tears. I heard Mrs. Patterson telling someone that Mr. Mercer must be going senile to choose someone so... Well, she didn't finish, but I knew what she meant. It's fine, Emma. It's not fine. You're wonderful and strong and exactly what he needs, and those horrible women are just jealous because their nieces and daughters didn't get chosen. Clara couldn't help but smile at Emma's fierce defense. Perhaps, but their jealousy is their problem, not mine. I have more important things to worry about than petty gossip. Like what? Like whether I can actually manage a ranch household. Like whether I can learn to ride well enough to be useful. Like whether I can build something real with a man I barely know. Clara sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. Like whether I'm brave enough to actually grab this chance instead of sabotaging it out of fear. Emma sat beside her, taking her hand. You are brave enough, Miss Clara. You've already proven that by trying 7 times. Most people give up after 1 rejection. That night, Clara lay awake thinking about bravery and fear, about the difference between enduring and truly living. She'd been enduring for 7 years, surviving rejections, swallowing pride, making herself small and acceptable and grateful for scraps. But Jonah was offering her something different. He was asking her to take up space, to stand her ground, to become someone who mattered. The question was whether she could actually do it, whether she could shed the skin of 7 failures and step into the role of partner to one of the territory's most successful men, whether she could look in the mirror and see someone worthy of being chosen instead of someone desperate for any chance at all. Monday passed in a strange limbo. Clara helped Mrs. Brennan with household tasks, walked to the general store for supplies, and endured more stares and whispers from townspeople who couldn't seem to stop discussing Jonah Mercer's baffling choice. She held her head high and went about her business, but each whispered comment felt like a small cut, death by 1,000 judgments. That evening, a knock came at her door. When Clara opened it, she found Margaret Hastings standing in the hallway, her expression tight but no longer openly hostile. "May I speak with you?" Margaret asked stiffly. Clara stepped back, allowing her into the small room. They stood awkwardly, 2 women who'd gotten off to the worst possible start, neither quite sure how to proceed. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said finally. "My behavior yesterday was inexcusable. Sam took me to task for it quite thoroughly last night." "I see." "The truth is—" Margaret paused, seeming to struggle with honesty. "The truth is, I had hopes for my niece Sarah. She's a lovely girl, accomplished, from a good family. When Jonah showed no interest despite my best efforts, I was disappointed. And when he chose you—" She stopped, flushing. "When he chose the old plain woman instead of the lovely accomplished girl, you were insulted on your niece's behalf," Clara finished flatly. "Yes." At least Margaret was honest. "But Sam reminded me that Jonah's first marriage taught him what he doesn't need. He doesn't need lovely or accomplished. He needs capable and strong. And according to Sam, who's worked with Jonah for 15 years, you've already proven yourself more capable in 2 days than most women would in 2 months." Clara wasn't sure how to respond to this backhanded compliment-apology combination. "I'm not asking us to be friends," Margaret continued, "but I am asking for a chance to start over. Dawson Creek is a small town and ranch families depend on each other. Sam and Jonah are close. That means you and I will be seeing each other regularly. I'd prefer not to have constant tension." Clara studied the woman in front of her, proud, used to getting her way, struggling with disappointment but willing to admit fault. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest, which counted for something. "I appreciate your honesty, Mrs. Hastings, and you're right, constant tension would make life difficult for everyone. I'm willing to start fresh if you are." Relief flickered across Margaret's face. "Thank you. And please, call me Margaret. Mrs. Hastings makes me feel ancient." After Margaret left, Clara sat on her bed feeling oddly unsettled. The apology had been genuine, but it also revealed something she hadn't fully considered: the political complexity of being Jonah Mercer's wife. Ranch families depended on each other, which meant navigating relationships, managing conflicts, building alliances. It wasn't enough to simply manage a household. She'd need to become part of a community, a leader even, whether she felt ready or not. Tuesday morning arrived cool and clear, perfect weather for hard work. Jonah came for Clara at 8, and they rode to the ranch with comfortable conversation about weather and cattle and the upcoming winter preparations. The horses' hooves beat a steady rhythm against packed earth, and Clara found herself relaxing into the ride, her body remembering skills long dormant. At the ranch, Cookie turned out to be a grizzled man of 60 with a permanent scowl and surprisingly gentle hands. He ran the kitchen like a military operation, feeding 30 hungry cowboys 3 meals a day with efficiency born of decades of practice. "So you're the one boss chose," Cookie said, looking Clara up and down. "You cook?" "Yes. Feeding church suppers, family dinners, nothing on this scale, but I learned fast." "Can you make decent biscuits?" "I can." "Prove it." He gestured to the massive workspace. "Supplies are there. Make enough for 30 men. I'll judge whether you're lying about your skills." Clara rolled up her sleeves and went to work, aware of Cookie watching her every move with critical eyes. She mixed dough, her hands moving with muscle memory older than her failures, and shaped biscuits with quick efficiency. Cookie's kitchen was better equipped than anywhere she'd worked before, and she found herself appreciating the quality of the supplies, the thoughtful organization. When the biscuits came out of the oven, golden, flaky, perfect, Cookie took one, broke it open, examined the texture, tasted it carefully. His scowl didn't change, but he nodded once. "You'll do. Can you manage stew for 30? Tell me what you have and I'll manage it." They worked side by side through the morning, cookie barking instructions and criticisms while Clara chopped vegetables, seasoned meat, and tried to absorb everything he was teaching her about cooking on this scale. It was hard, hot work, but satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. There was purpose here, tangible results, men who'd be fed because of her effort. At noon, the hands came in for dinner, 30 hungry cowboys crowding into the long dining hall, laughing and talking and smelling of horses and hard work. Clara served alongside Cookie, ladling stew into bowls, distributing biscuits, refilling coffee cups. The men were polite, some openly curious, a few skeptical, but all of them respectful. Jonah sat at the head of the table, watching Clara move through the room with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she refilled his coffee, he caught her wrist gently. "You're doing well," he said quietly, for her ears only. "It's just cooking. It's more than that. Look at them." He nodded toward the hands, who were eating with obvious enjoyment, several already reaching for second helpings. "They're relaxed around you. That matters. Men work better when they're comfortable in their own space." After dinner, Jonah took Clara on a tour of the outbuildings, the barn where pregnant mares were carefully monitored, the tack room where saddles and bridles hung in neat rows, the office where ranch business was conducted. He explained the breeding program for his horses, the market for quality stock, the careful genetics he'd been building for years. "Catherine never cared about this part," he said, running a hand along a mare's neck. "She wanted me to keep ranch business separate from home life. But the ranch is my life, Clara. If you're going to be my wife, you need to understand it, be part of it. Can you do that?" Clara looked at the horses, the meticulously organized operation, the passion in Jonah's voice when he discussed his work. "I want to try. I want to understand what drives you, what you've built here. It matters to you, so it should matter to me." Something in his expression softened. "That's all I need. Willingness to engage instead of existing parallel to my life." They were standing close in the barn's dimness, dust motes floating in streams of light through the roof gaps. Clara was suddenly acutely aware of Jonah's physical presence, his height, his strength, the warmth radiating from him. This was the man she'd marry if she said yes, the man who'd share her life, her bed, her future. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange calm settle over her shoulders like a familiar coat. "Jonah," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "Go ahead." "I'm going to say yes. At the end of this week, when you ask formally, my answer will be yes." He went very still. "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be about stepping into a life I've never lived. But I've seen enough to know that what you're offering is real. Hard work, yes. Challenges, absolutely. But also purpose and partnership and the chance to build something meaningful. I want that. I want this." Jonah reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in one work-roughened hand. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, gentle despite the calluses. "I'll make you a promise right now, Clara Whitmore. I will never take you for granted. I will never treat you as less than my full partner. And I will stand beside you against anyone who tries to make you feel small or worthless. You have my word on that." Clara's eyes stung, and she blinked hard against sudden tears. "That's all I've ever wanted. To matter to someone. To be seen as valuable. You are valuable. And anyone who can't see that is a fool." They stood like that for a long moment, the barn quiet around them except for horses shifting in their stalls. Then Jonah stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself, though his eyes still held warmth. "We should get you back to town before dark. But Clara, thank you for telling me. It helps, knowing where we stand." The ride back to Dawson Creek felt different, charged with the knowledge of decisions made and futures chosen. Clara found herself studying Jonah's profile as he rode, memorizing the lines of his face, the capable way he handled his horse. In a week, this man would be her husband. In a week, her entire life would transform. The thought no longer terrified her quite so much. At Mrs. Brennan's, Jonah helped Clara dismount, his hand steady on her waist. "Tomorrow, I need you to visit with Doc Hadley. Just a checkup, make sure you're fit for frontier life. After that, we'll go to the church, talk to Reverend Matthews about the ceremony. Thursday, I'll take you riding, teach you the property boundaries. Friday," he paused. "Friday, I'll ask you properly. And if your answer is still yes, we'll marry Saturday morning. Clara's heart hammered. 5 more days. 5 days until everything changed. All right, she managed. Sleep well, Clara. You've earned it. That night she told Emma her decision. The girl threw her arms around Clara, crying happy tears and babbling about romance and fairy tales until Clara had to gently disengage. It's not a fairy tale, Emma. It's a practical arrangement between practical people. That's what you keep saying. Emma wiped her eyes, grinning. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching. That's not just practical, Miss Clara. That's something deeper. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her. She fell asleep thinking about Jonah's promise, to never take her for granted, to never make her feel small. It was more than she'd ever dared hope for from any man. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Wednesday morning broke gray and drizzly, autumn rain pattering against Clara's window in a rhythm that matched her nervous heartbeat. In 3 days, she would marry Jonah Mercer. In 3 days, her life would transform from rootless wandering to permanent anchoring. The reality of it pressed against her chest like a physical weight, equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Dr. Hadley's office occupied a small building near the edge of town, its front room serving as both waiting area and examination space. The doctor himself was exactly as Jonah had described, competent but clearly fond of whiskey, his hands shaking slightly as he gestured Clara toward the examination chair. "So you're Mercer's bride-to-be," Hadley said, his breath carrying the faint scent of alcohol even at 9 in the morning. "Caused quite a stir, that choice did. Half the town's still talking about it." "So I've noticed." Clara settled into the chair, trying not to tense as Hadley began his examination, checking her eyes, her throat, listening to her heart and lungs with a stethoscope that had seen better years. "Ranching's hard on women," Hadley said conversationally as he worked. "Catherine Mercer, she wasn't built for it. Too delicate, too sheltered. Frontier life broke her down piece by piece until there wasn't much left to save when the childbirth complications hit." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. "I'm not Catherine." "No, you're not. You're older, tougher, already weathered by life. That's in your favor." He stepped back, making notes on a piece of paper. "Physically, you're sound. Little underweight, probably from lean years, but nothing serious. No signs of consumption or other illness. You'll manage the work if you pace yourself and don't try to do everything at once." "That's reassuring." Hadley studied her over his spectacles, his bloodshot eyes surprisingly sharp. "Can I give you some advice, Miss Whitmore? Not as a doctor, but as someone who's lived in this territory 20 years? Please, don't try to be Catherine. Don't try to be what you think Jonah needs based on what his first wife was. Be exactly who you are, capable, practical, strong enough to survive repeated rejection and keep trying. That's what he saw in you. That's what he needs. The moment you start pretending to be something else, you'll lose what made him choose you in the first place." The words settled into Clara's chest, uncomfortably perceptive. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Doctor. I'll remember that." After the appointment, she met Jonah at the church as planned. Reverend Matthews was an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner that put Clara somewhat at ease, despite her discomfort with religious settings. He asked them basic questions about their intentions, their understanding of marriage as commitment, their willingness to build a life together through hard times and good. "Mr. Mercer," the Reverend said carefully, "I must ask, you've known Miss Whitmore less than a week. Are you certain this isn't a hasty decision made in loneliness?" Jonah's jaw tightened, but his voice remained respectful. "Reverend, I spent 4 years alone rather than make a hasty choice. I know what I'm looking for in a partner, and Clara fits those requirements better than any woman I've met. Time doesn't always equal wisdom. Sometimes you just know." "And you, Miss Whitmore? You're content to marry a man you barely know and move to an isolated ranch far from any support?" Clara met the Reverend's eyes directly. "I've been alone and unsupported for 7 years, Reverend. At least this way I'll have purpose and partnership. That's more than I've had in a very long time." Matthew sighed, but nodded. "Very well. I'll perform the ceremony Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I assume you'll want something simple?" "Very simple," Jonah confirmed. "Just the necessary witnesses and legal requirements. No fuss." As they left the church, rain still falling in steady sheets, Jonah took Clara's elbow and guided her under the shelter of a large oak tree. Water dripped from the leaves above them, creating a curtain of sound that gave them unexpected privacy despite being in the middle of town. "Are you having second thoughts?" Jonah asked quietly. "You seem tense in there." "Not second thoughts exactly, more like reality setting in." Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the damp cold. "In 3 days, I'll be Mrs. Jonah Mercer. I'll be responsible for a household of 30 men, for managing a ranch operation I barely understand, for standing beside you in community affairs and territorial politics. It's overwhelming when I let myself think about it too much. Then don't think about it all at once." Jonah's voice was steady, grounding. "Think about tomorrow. Just tomorrow. We'll ride the property. I'll show you the boundaries, teach you the landmarks. One day, one step, one lesson at a time. You don't have to master everything immediately." "What if I fail? What if I can't manage it all?" "Then we adjust." "Clara, listen to me." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I'm not expecting perfection. I'm expecting effort and honesty. If something's too much, you tell me and we figure out solutions together. That's what partnership means. It's not you struggling alone while I judge from a distance. It's both of us working through problems as they come." Rain dripped steadily around them, and Clara studied Jonah's face. The absolute sincerity in his storm-gray eyes, the firm set of his mouth that spoke of determination rather than doubt. He believed in her capabilities more than she believed in them herself. "How do you have so much faith in someone you barely know?" she asked. "Because I've watched you for a week. I've seen you face hostile church congregations without flinching. I've seen you work in a kitchen you'd never used before and produce meals the hands actually enjoyed. I've seen you meet skepticism with dignity instead of defensiveness. Those things tell me everything I need to know about your character. And if I disappoint you, then we'll deal with that when and if it happens. But Clara, you need to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. You need to stop assuming failure is inevitable just because you've failed before. This is different. I'm different. We're building something new together, not repeating old patterns." Before Clara could respond, a carriage splashed through a puddle nearby, spraying muddy water and breaking the moment. Jonah stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself, though his expression remained warm. "Come on, let's get you back to Mrs. Brennan's before you catch cold. Tomorrow we'll ride, weather permitting. Friday, I'll ask you properly, the way it should be done. And Saturday," he paused, "Saturday we start our life together." That evening, Clara helped Mrs. Brennan with dinner preparations, grateful for the distraction of chopping vegetables and stirring pots. The other women in the boarding house had begun treating her differently, with a mixture of awe and envy that made Clara uncomfortable. She was still the same person she'd been a week ago, just with drastically different prospects. Emma burst into the kitchen, her face flushed with excitement. "Miss Clara, there are women here to see you." "Women?" "Mrs. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, and Mrs. Whitfield. They're in the parlor, and they say they've come to help you prepare for the wedding." Clara exchanged a glance with Mrs. Brennan, who shrugged. "Better go see what they want. Could be genuine help, could be more judgment disguised as concern." The 3 women waiting in the parlor were all wives of successful Dawson Creek businessmen, women who'd been part of the hostile congregation at church, who'd whispered and speculated about Jonah's baffling choice. Now they sat with parcels and packages, wearing expressions that ranged from genuinely friendly to carefully neutral. "Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Patterson said, rising, "we've come to offer our assistance with wedding preparations. We understand the ceremony is Saturday, which leaves very little time for proper arrangements." Clara stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to trust this sudden friendliness. "That's kind of you, but Mr. Mercer and I are keeping things very simple." "Nonsense," Mrs. Chen interjected, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. "Simple is one thing, unprepared is another. You need a proper dress, flowers for the ceremony, a wedding breakfast afterward. These things must be done correctly." "I have a dress." "You have traveling clothes," Mrs. Whitfield interrupted gently. She was younger than the others, with a kind face and gentle manner. "Perfectly fine for everyday wear, but this is your wedding, dear. You deserve something special." They opened their parcels, revealing a beautiful dress in cream-colored silk with modest lace trim. It was simple but elegant, clearly expensive, the kind of garment Clara could never have afforded in her current circumstances. "This was my wedding dress," Mrs. Whitfield said softly. I've been saving it for my daughter, but she's only 7, and you need it now. Please, I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Clara's throat tightened. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Mrs. Patterson said firmly, though not unkindly. "Miss Whitmore, Clara, I'll be honest with you. We were skeptical when Jonah chose you. We expected him to select someone young and pretty, someone who fit our assumptions about what a successful rancher's wife should be. But we've been watching you this week. Watching me fumble through social situations and try not to drown in judgment?" Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "Watching you hold your head high despite that judgment. Watching you work in Cookie's kitchen without complaint. Watching you treat Margaret Hastings with grace after she was cruel to you. These things tell us that perhaps Jonah knew what he was doing after all." "We're not asking to be your best friends," Mrs. Patterson continued. "But Dawson Creek is a small community, and ranch wives depend on each other. When winter storms hit and you're isolated for weeks, when supplies run low, when medical emergencies happen, we help each other survive. We'd like to include you in that network." Clara looked at these women who'd judged her harshly only days ago, now offering genuine assistance and tentative acceptance. It wasn't a complete reversal. She could still see reservation in some of their eyes, still sense they were testing her worthiness. But it was an opening, a chance to build connections that might matter when life got difficult. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I appreciate your help, and Mrs. Whitfield, I'd be honored to wear your dress." The women stayed for an hour, discussing practical matters, flowers that could be gathered despite the season, food for a simple wedding breakfast, who would witness the ceremony. Their conversation gradually became less formal, touching on ranch life's realities, winter preparation, the challenges of managing large households. Clara listened more than she spoke, absorbing information that might prove useful in her new life. After they left, Emma helped Clara try on the wedding dress. It fit nearly perfectly, requiring only minor adjustments that Mrs. Brennan promised to handle. Clara studied her reflection in the small mirror, a woman in a beautiful dress, looking almost bridal, almost hopeful, almost like someone who deserved happiness. "You look beautiful," Emma breathed. "Mr. Mercer won't be able to take his eyes off you. It's just a dress, Emma. It's a symbol. It's you stepping into your new life looking like you belong there." Emma adjusted the lace at Clara's shoulders. "Miss Clara, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Are you scared? About the wedding night, I mean. About being with a man you barely know?" Clara had been trying not to think about that particular aspect of marriage. She'd had limited experience with men, a few awkward encounters in her youth that had taught her more about disappointment than pleasure. The idea of sharing a bed with Jonah Mercer was both terrifying and strangely compelling. "Terrified," she admitted honestly. "But I imagine most brides are, even when they marry for love. At least Jonah's been honest about expectations. He's not pretending romance where there isn't any." "Maybe romance will grow," Emma said hopefully. "My mother always said the best marriages start with respect and build to love." "Perhaps. Or perhaps we'll have a comfortable partnership without romantic love. That would still be more than I hoped for a week ago." Thursday arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air perfect for riding. Jonah came for Clara early, bringing Rosie and a packed lunch for a full day's exploration. They rode north from the ranch, Jonah pointing out property boundaries, water sources, the places where cattle like to gather in different seasons. "This creek marks the northern edge," he explained, dismounting near a clear stream that burbled over smooth stones. "Beyond this is open range, but I've got grazing rights through agreement with neighboring ranches. During summer, we move the herds up here where the grass stays greener." Clara dismounted carefully, her muscles protesting less than previous rides. She was getting stronger, more confident in the saddle. "How many cattle do you run?" "About 3,000 head currently. Could support more, but I prefer quality over quantity. Better to have healthy stock that brings good prices than push the land too hard trying to maximize numbers." They sat by the creek eating the lunch Cookie had packed. Sandwiches, apples, cookies that were surprisingly good. Jonah talked about his vision for the ranch, his breeding programs for both cattle and horses, his plans for expansion if market conditions remained favorable. Clara listened, asking questions when concepts confused her, beginning to understand the scope of what she was stepping into. "You'll need to understand all this eventually," Jonah said, gesturing at the land around them. Not because I expect you to make ranching decisions, but because the ranch is our livelihood. If something happens to me, accident, illness, whatever, you need to be able to work with Sam and keep things running until you figure out long-term solutions. The practicality of it was almost jarring. You're planning for your death already? I'm planning for contingencies. Frontier life is dangerous, Clara. I could get kicked by a horse, break my neck in a fall, catch pneumonia during winter roundup. It happens. I need to know my wife can survive without me if necessary. That's a grim way to think about marriage. It's a realistic way to think about marriage. Jonah's voice was firm, but not unkind. I loved Catherine, but I didn't prepare her for reality. When she died, I nearly fell apart because I'd built my entire life around having her there. I won't make that mistake again. You and I will build something together, but we'll also maintain our individual strength. You'll learn to manage the ranch, keep books, handle business transactions. I'll learn to manage a household if needed. We'll be partners who enhance each other, not crutches propping each other up. Clara considered this philosophy, so different from romantic notions of marriage as two halves completing a whole. Jonah was proposing something more pragmatic, two whole people choosing to work together while maintaining individual capability. It was less poetic, but somehow more appealing. I like that approach, she said slowly. I've been half a person for too long, diminishing myself to fit into smaller spaces. I'd prefer to become whole again. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Both of us whole, both of us strong, both of us better together than apart, but still functional alone if necessary. They rode further, exploring the eastern boundary where the land rose into rocky hills dotted with scrub pine. Jonah pointed out a small cabin in the distance, weathered but intact. Line shack, he explained. Cowboys use it during roundup or when checking on herds in winter. There are 4 of them scattered across the property. Sometimes during bad storms, they're the difference between life and death for men caught out on the range. Do you still work roundup yourself? Every year. Can't ask men to do work I'm not willing to do alongside them. That's part of earning their respect. He glanced at her. Catherine hated when I went on roundup, said it wasn't appropriate for a ranch owner to do common cowboy work, but I wasn't raised to stand back and watch while others sweat. I wouldn't ask you to stop, Clara said. It's part of who you are, though I admit I'll worry when you're out in dangerous conditions. Something in Jonah's expression softened. That's more than Catherine ever offered. She complained but never worried. There's a difference. They returned to the ranch as afternoon shadows lengthened, both tired but satisfied with the day's work. Sam met them in the yard, his weathered face creased with something that might have been approval as he helped Clara dismount. She's getting stronger in the saddle, Sam observed to Jonah. Give her a few more weeks. She'll be riding like she was born to it. That's the plan, Jonah said. Clara, Sam's wife wants to invite you to dinner tomorrow night. Margaret's trying to make amends properly. Are you willing? Clara remembered Margaret's stiff apology, her admission of disappointment about her niece. The invitation could be genuine peace offering or another test. Either way, refusing would create tension she didn't need. I'm willing, she said. That evening, back at Mrs. Brennan's, Clara found herself restless and unable to settle. Tomorrow night was dinner with the Hastings. Saturday morning was her wedding. In 48 hours, her entire life would be irrevocably different. The reality of it pressed against her chest, making breathing difficult. She slipped out of the boarding house and walked through Dawson Creek's quiet streets, needing space to think. The town was settling into evening rhythms. Lamps lit in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, families gathering for supper. Normal life continuing while Clara's world transformed. She found herself at the church, its white walls glowing in the dusk. The door was unlocked, and Clara slipped inside, seeking not faith, but simply quiet space to process everything churning inside her. The interior was dim and peaceful, rows of empty pews facing the simple altar. Clara sat in the back row, hands folded in her lap, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back all week, fear and hope and determination and terror, all swirling together in a confusing mass. Thought I might find you here. Clara turned to see Jonah silhouetted in the doorway. He approached quietly, settling into the pew beside her with the patient stillness of a man comfortable with silence. How did you know where I was? Clara asked. Mrs. Brennan mentioned you'd gone for a walk. Only so many places in town to walk to, and something told me you'd need quiet space tonight. He studied her face in the dim light. Having doubts? Yes. No, I don't know. Clara twisted her hands together. I'm terrified, Jonah. Not of you specifically, but of failing, of disappointing you, of proving everyone right who said you made a mistake choosing me. What if I told you I'm terrified too? She looked at him, surprised. Of what? Of repeating my mistakes with Catherine, of asking too much from you too fast, of being so focused on partnership and practicality that I forget you're a person with feelings and needs beyond household management. He leaned back against the pew, his expression troubled. I'm good at ranching, Clara. I'm good at business and cattle and horses. I'm not good at relationships. Catherine tried to tell me that, tried to explain how lonely she was, but I didn't listen well enough. By the time I understood, it was too late. I'm not Catherine. No, you're not. You're stronger, more independent, more suited to this life. But that doesn't mean you won't struggle. That doesn't mean there won't be times when you're lonely or overwhelmed or regretting this choice. And when those times come, I need you to tell me. I need you to trust me enough to be honest instead of suffering in silence. Clara absorbed this, hearing the vulnerability beneath Jonah's practical words. He was as scared as she was, just of different things. They were both walking into unknown territory, both risking failure, both hoping this impossible partnership might actually work. I can promise honesty, she said slowly. I can promise effort and willingness to try. I can't promise I won't fail or struggle, but I can promise I won't hide it from you when I do. That's all I'm asking. Jonah reached out, taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple, almost chaste, but it sent warmth spreading through Clara's chest. Tomorrow night, after dinner with Sam and Margaret, I'm going to ask you formally. Get down on one knee, offer a ring, do it properly the way you deserve. And Clara, if your answer is still yes, if you still want this despite all the fear and uncertainty, then Saturday morning we'll stand in front of Reverend Matthews and make promises to each other. Legal promises, binding promises. You'll become my wife, and I'll become your husband, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. And if I say no tomorrow, then I'll respect that decision and wish you well in whatever you choose to do next. No anger, no resentment, just acknowledgement that we gave it an honest try. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, both processing the enormity of what lay ahead. Finally, Jonah stood, gently pulling Clara to her feet. Come on, let's get you back before Mrs. Brennan sends a search party. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, and you need rest. He walked her back to the boarding house, their pace leisurely, neither rushing toward the future nor fleeing from it. At the door, Jonah paused, his expression serious in the lamplight spilling from the windows. Clara, whatever you decide tomorrow, I want you to know this week with you has been good. You've reminded me what it feels like to look forward instead of dwelling in loss. Regardless of how this turns out, thank you for that. Before she could respond, he touched his hat brim and walked away, leaving Clara standing on the porch with a heart that felt too full for her chest to contain. Inside, Emma was waiting, practically vibrating with curiosity. Where were you? Mrs. Brennan was worried. Just walking, thinking. About tomorrow? About Mr. Mercer's proposal? About everything, about whether I'm making the right choice or just grabbing at security out of desperation. Emma took both of Clara's hands, her young face earnest. Miss Clara, can I tell you what I see? Please? I see a woman who's been knocked down over and over, but keeps standing back up. I see someone brave enough to face hostile crowds and judgment and uncertainty without breaking. I see someone Mr. Mercer looks at like she's valuable, like she matters, like she's exactly what he's been searching for. That's not desperation, Miss Clara. That's courage. Clara pulled Emma into a hug, grateful for this girl's fierce faith when her own wavered. Thank you. I needed to hear that. That night, Clara lay in bed reviewing the week, the platform, the choice, the courtship, the slow building of something that felt increasingly real. Tomorrow she would have dinner with Sam and Margaret Hastings. Tomorrow Jonah would propose formally. And the day after, she would either walk down a church aisle toward a new future or ride a train west toward more uncertainty. The choice should have been impossible. Instead, somewhere between sleep and waking, Clara realized the choice had already been made. not out of desperation or fear or lack of options, but because Jonah Mercer had offered her something precious: partnership, respect, and the chance to become someone who mattered. She'd been invisible for 7 years, passed over and forgotten, and diminished. It was time to be seen, time to be chosen, time to choose herself. And when Jonah asked tomorrow, her answer would be yes, not because she had no other options, but because this option, this man, this life they could build together was exactly what she wanted. The certainty settled into her bones like warmth after long cold, and for the first time in 7 years, Clara Whitmore fell asleep without fear gnawing at her dreams. Tomorrow she would say yes, and Saturday she would begin her life as someone who belonged. Friday morning dawned clear and golden, the kind of autumn day that felt like a gift after weeks of uncertain weather. Clara woke with surprising calm, the anxiety that had plagued her all week replaced by quiet certainty. Tonight Jonah would propose formally. Tomorrow she would marry him. The decisions were made, the path chosen, and there was peace in that clarity. She dressed carefully in one of her better day dresses and pinned her hair with extra care, aware that tonight mattered in ways beyond the simple asking of a question whose answer was already known. Emma helped with the buttons down her back, chattering nervously about romance and proposals, while Clara listened with patient amusement. "You must be so excited," Emma said, adjusting Clara's collar. "A formal proposal. It's like something from a novel." "It's a formality," Clara corrected gently. "We've already discussed our intentions quite clearly. This is simply making it official." "But still, he's going to get down on one knee and offer you a ring, and, oh, Miss Clara, aren't you even a little bit thrilled?" Clara considered this, examining her feelings honestly. "I'm content. I'm hopeful. Those feel more valuable than thrilled, somehow, more solid." The day passed in strange suspension, hours that felt both endless and too quick. Clara helped Mrs. Brennan with household tasks, walked to the general store for last-minute items, and tried to ignore the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed her everywhere. By now, the entire town knew that tomorrow Clara Whitmore would marry Jonah Mercer in a small ceremony at the church. The gossip had shifted from outright skepticism to cautious curiosity, people waiting to see if the unlikely match would actually work. At 4 o'clock, Jonah arrived to collect Clara for dinner at the Hastings home. He looked more formal than usual, wearing a dark suit jacket over a crisp white shirt, his hair neatly combed and his boots polished to a shine. Clara felt something flutter in her chest at the sight of him, not quite romantic attraction, but something warmer than simple respect. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. "You look nervous," she observed. "Sam's wife is an excellent cook, but a terrible judge of when to stop serving food. I'm preparing myself for the ordeal." His mouth quirked in almost smile. "Also, I'm about to propose marriage to a woman in front of witnesses. That's enough to make any man nervous." They walked through town toward the Hastings home, a substantial 2-story house that spoke of Sam's long partnership with Jonah and the prosperity it had brought. Margaret met them at the door, her expression carefully neutral but not hostile. "Welcome," she said, stepping back to let them enter. "Sam's in the parlor. Dinner will be ready shortly." The evening was surprisingly pleasant. Margaret had clearly made an effort, serving an excellent meal and steering conversation toward safe topics: upcoming winter preparations, territorial news, the quality of this year's cattle crop. Sam told stories about the ranch's early days when Jonah was building everything from nothing, working alongside his hands from dawn until dark. "Couldn't afford to hire enough men in those days," Sam said, refilling Jonah's wine glass. "So boss here did the work of 3 men himself, nearly killed himself doing it too. I told him more than once he'd work himself into an early grave." "And yet here I am, still vertical," Jonah said dryly. "Because Catherine made you slow down," Margaret added, then caught herself, flushing. "I'm sorry, that was—" "It's fine," Jonah said quietly. "It's true. Catherine did make me slow down, realize I'd built a successful ranch but had no life outside of it. That was valuable, even if other aspects of our marriage were difficult. The honesty was startling, particularly in front of witnesses. Clara felt Margaret's eyes on her, assessing, and she kept her expression neutral, refusing to show discomfort at this discussion of Jonah's first wife. "Clara's going to face different challenges," Sam said, apparently deciding directness was the order of the evening. "Catherine struggled with isolation and the work. Clara strikes me as stronger in those areas, but she's walking into a situation where she'll be compared to a dead woman everyone's idealized. That's not easy either. Sam, Margaret hissed, scandalized. No, he's right, Clara said, finding her voice. I'm going to be compared to Catherine. Every choice I make, every way I manage the household, people will judge it against what she did or what they imagine she would have done. That's inevitable when you marry a widower. And how do you plan to handle that? Margaret asked, her tone sharp, but genuinely curious. Clara met her eyes directly. By being myself. Not trying to replace Catherine or live up to some idealized memory of her, but by building my own relationship with Jonah and managing the household in ways that work for us now. Catherine was his past. I'm his future. Those are different things. Silence followed this statement, broken finally by Sam's appreciative chuckle. She'll do, boss. She'll definitely do. After dinner, Sam suggested a walk in their garden to aid digestion, but Margaret intercepted with surprising tact. Actually, I believe Jonah wanted a private word with Clara. Perhaps we should give them the parlor. The older couple retreated, leaving Clara and Jonah alone in the comfortable room with its crackling fireplace and soft lamplight. Jonah stood, suddenly looking more nervous than Clara had ever seen him, and she felt her heart rate accelerate. Clara, he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've never been good with pretty words. Catherine used to complain that I was too blunt, too practical. But I'm going to try because you deserve that effort. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, then, to Clara's genuine surprise, lowered himself to one knee in front of her chair. The gesture was traditional, almost old-fashioned, and completely unexpected from this practical man. This week, I've watched you face judgment and skepticism with more grace than most people could manage, Jonah said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability of his position. I've watched you work hard to learn things outside your experience. I've watched you be honest when honesty was difficult, and brave when bravery was required. And I've realized that choosing you on that platform was the best decision I've made in years. Clara's throat tightened, tears threatening despite her best efforts to maintain composure. I'm not offering you an easy life, Jonah continued. I'm not offering romance or luxury or freedom from hard work. What I'm offering is partnership with a man who will respect you, value you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I'm offering you a home and a purpose, and the chance to build something meaningful together. He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire. Clara Whitmore. Will you marry me? She looked at this man kneeling before her, offering everything he had in the most honest way possible. No false promises, no romantic illusions, just raw truth and genuine respect. 7 platforms, 7 rejections, 7 times she'd been found wanting. And now, finally, a man who saw her worth and chose her deliberately. Yes, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. Jonah slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if he'd somehow known her exact size, and rose to his feet. For a moment they stood close, and Clara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture that felt somehow more intimate than any kiss could have been. Thank you, he said quietly, for saying yes, for taking this chance on me. Thank you for seeing me, Clara whispered, for choosing me when no one else would. Their loss, my gain. Jonah's smile was small but genuine. Tomorrow morning, you become my wife. Are you ready for that? As ready as I'll ever be. Sam and Margaret returned shortly after, offering congratulations that seemed genuinely warm. Margaret even hugged Clara, whispering in her ear, I was wrong about you. I'm glad I was. Be good to him, and he'll be good to you. Walking back to Mrs. Zull, Brennan's through the dark streets, Clara's hand tucked into Jonah's elbow. She felt the weight of the ring on her finger. Solid, real, proof that this impossible thing was actually happening. Tomorrow she would marry this man. Tomorrow her life would transform from rootless uncertainty to permanent anchoring. Nervous about tomorrow? Jonah asked as they approached the boarding house. Surprisingly, no. I was nervous all week, but now that the decision is made, I feel mostly calm. Good. That's good. He paused at the door, studying her face in the lamplight. Clara, I need to tell you something about tomorrow night. Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, understanding immediately what he meant. The wedding night. the intimacy she'd been trying not to think about too much. "I know you're nervous," Jonah said quietly. "I know we barely know each other, and this is all happening fast. So I want you to understand. Tomorrow night, we'll take things at whatever pace you need. There's no rush, no expectation that everything happens immediately. We have our whole lives to build all aspects of our marriage." The consideration in his words made Clara's chest ache. "Thank you for that. I am nervous. My experience is limited. Mine is limited to one woman I married 18 years ago, so we'll figure it out together, same as everything else." He squeezed her hand gently. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." Inside, Emma and the other women had prepared a surprise, a small celebration with cake and tea, everyone gathering to wish Clara well on the eve of her wedding. They presented her with small gifts, embroidered handkerchiefs, a lovely shawl, practical items for her new home. The kindness of it overwhelmed Clara, who'd grown accustomed to managing life alone without support or community. "Thank you," she said, voice breaking. "All of you, I didn't expect this." "You're one of us now," Mrs. Brennan said firmly. "A frontier wife about to build a life out here. We take care of our own." That night, Clara lay awake in her bed for the last time as an unmarried woman. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her father's death, the loss of everything familiar, 7 failed attempts at finding a new life. Every rejection had felt like the end of hope, but instead they'd been clearing the path toward this moment, this man, this future. Tomorrow she would stand in a small church and make promises that would bind her life to Jonah Mercer's. She would become his wife, his partner, the woman responsible for helping him build and maintain everything he'd worked for. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly what she wanted. Clara touched the ring on her finger, still marveling at its presence, and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." To whom or what, she wasn't entirely sure. Perhaps to fate, or chance, or her own stubborn refusal to stop trying. Whatever force had led her to that platform in Dawson Creek at exactly the moment Jonah Mercer arrived late, she was grateful. Morning arrived with church bells ringing, their sound carrying through Clara's window and pulling her from dreams of endless grassland and storm-gray eyes. She woke with butterflies in her stomach, but no regrets, no last-minute doubts. Today was her wedding day. Emma burst in almost immediately, followed by Mrs. Brennan and the other women, all of them chattering and helping Clara prepare. They washed and styled her hair, lacing it with small wildflowers someone had gathered despite the late season. They helped her into Mrs. Whitfield's beautiful cream silk dress, adjusting every fold and button until it hung perfectly. When Clara finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman looking back was elegant, almost beautiful, wearing confidence like she'd earned it through fire. This was not the desperate woman who'd stood on a platform 8 days ago. This was someone new, someone stronger, someone ready to claim the life she'd been offered. "Oh, Miss Clara," Emma breathed, tears streaming down her face. "You're beautiful." "I'm acceptable," Clara corrected, but she was smiling. They walked to the church together, a small procession of women surrounding Clara like an honor guard. The church was fuller than expected. Apparently half the town had decided to witness Jonah Mercer's unlikely wedding. Clara felt their stares but refused to let them bother her. Let them watch. Let them judge. She knew her own worth now, and Jonah knew it too. That was all that mattered. Inside, Jonah waited at the altar with Sam as his witness. When he saw Clara walking down the aisle, his expression shifted. Surprise, appreciation, something deeper that Clara couldn't quite name, but that made warmth spread through her chest. He looked distinguished in his dark suit, his usual sternness softened by genuine emotion. Reverend Matthews performed a simple ceremony, traditional words about commitment and partnership and building life together. Clara spoke her vows clearly, promising to honor and cherish, to stand beside Jonah through difficulty and joy, to build a life worthy of the chance they'd been given. Jonah's vows were equally clear, his voice steady, as he promised to respect and protect, to value her as his equal partner, to never take her presence for granted. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Jonah cupped Clara's face gently and kissed her. Their first real kiss, soft and brief, but carrying the weight of promise. Clara felt something settle deep in her chest, a rightness she hadn't expected but welcomed completely. They signed the marriage certificate with Sam and Margaret as witnesses, making it legal and binding. Clara wrote her new name for the first time, Clara Mercer. It looked strange, but right on the page. Proof that she belonged somewhere, to someone. as part of something larger than herself. The wedding breakfast was held at Mrs. Brennan's boarding house, the women having prepared a feast despite the short notice. Townspeople came and went, offering congratulations that ranged from genuinely warm to carefully polite. Clara accepted all of it with grace, her hand firmly held in Jonah's, presenting a united front that gradually wore down the remaining skepticism. Margaret Hastings approached mid-morning, pulling Clara aside while Jonah was deep in conversation with Sam. "I have something for you," she said, pressing a small package into Clara's hands. Wedding gift. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal, blank pages waiting to be filled. "I thought you might want to record your first year," Margaret said quietly. "The challenges, the victories, the building of your life. Years from now, you'll want to remember how it began." "Thank you," Clara said, genuinely touched. "This is thoughtful." "Clara, I judged you harshly based on surface appearance. That was wrong of me, and I apologize sincerely. You're going to be an excellent partner for Jonah, and I hope we can build a real friendship over time." "I'd like that." By early afternoon, Jonah was ready to leave. He'd arranged for Clara's few possessions to be loaded into a wagon, and now he helped her up onto the seat beside him. The assembled crowd called out final well wishes as they pulled away from Dawson Creek, heading north toward the ranch that was now Clara's home. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses moving at an easy pace, autumn sunshine warm on their faces. Clara studied the land with new eyes. This was her territory now, her responsibility to help protect and nurture. The enormity of it was stunning, but she no longer felt overwhelmed. She felt ready. "Having second thoughts yet?" Jonah asked, glancing at her with slight smile. "Not a one, you?" "Not a one." He reached over, taking her hand and lacing their fingers together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Mercer." The ranch came into view as afternoon shadows lengthened, the sprawling complex of buildings that was now Clara's to manage. Cowboys working in the corrals stopped to watch their boss arrive with his new wife, some waving, others just staring with frank curiosity. Sam had ridden ahead and was waiting in the yard with Cookie and several of the senior hands. "Welcome home, ma'am," Sam said, helping Clara down from the wagon. "The house is ready for you." Inside, Clara found that someone, probably Sam and Margaret, had made an effort. Wildflowers filled vases throughout the main rooms. The kitchen was spotlessly clean, and upstairs in what was now her and Jonah's bedroom, fresh linens covered the large bed, and more flowers brightened the dresser. "It's lovely," Clara said softly, touching the flower petals. "It's a start," Jonah replied, coming to stand beside her. "You'll make it home over time. Change whatever you want. Arrange things however makes sense to you. This is your house now, Clara. Your home." The words settled around her shoulders like a warm cloak. Home. After 7 years of rootless wandering, of temporary rooms and borrowed spaces, she finally had a home again. That evening, Cookie insisted on preparing a special dinner for the newlyweds, serving them in the main house instead of making them eat in the bunkhouse dining hall with the hands. Clara sat across from Jonah at the large dining table, still wearing her wedding dress, feeling surreal and grounded all at once. "To new beginnings," Jonah said, raising his glass. "To partnership," Clara countered, touching her glass to his. They ate slowly, talking about plans for the coming weeks. Clara's gradual assumption of household duties, her continued writing lessons, the approaching winter, and what preparations remained. Practical conversation, but underneath it ran a current of nervous anticipation about what would happen when the meal ended and they retired upstairs together. When Clara couldn't delay any longer, she excused herself to change into the nightgown Mrs. Brennan had gifted her. Simple white cotton, modest but soft. She brushed out her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders, and tried to calm the butterflies rioting in her stomach. Jonah knocked softly before entering their bedroom, giving her time to steel herself. He changed into sleep clothes as well, and seeing him in that state of casual undress made Clara's breath catch. He was a large man, powerfully built from years of hard work, and the reality of sharing a bed with him suddenly felt very immediate. "Clara," he said gently, reading the nervousness in her face. "We don't have to. That is, there's no requirement that we consummate the marriage tonight. We can take our time." "No," Clara said, surprising herself with her certainty. "We're married. This is part of that. I'm nervous, but I want us to begin as we mean to continue. Fully committed, fully partners in all ways." Jonah approached slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When he reached her, he cupped her face in both hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. Then we'll go slow. And if anything is uncomfortable or frightening, you tell me and we stop. Understood? Understood. He kissed her then, deeper than the brief kiss in the church, and Clara let herself respond, let herself lean into the unfamiliar intimacy. His hands were careful as they explored, and when he finally led her to the bed, Clara went willingly, fear mixing with curiosity and a strange kind of trust she hadn't expected to feel so quickly. What followed was awkward and tender and sometimes clumsy, two people learning each other's rhythms and responses. Jonah was patient, attentive to her reactions, stopping when she tensed, and only continuing when she relaxed again. Clara discovered that her limited experience had taught her nothing about what intimacy could be with someone who genuinely cared about her pleasure as much as his own. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the dark, Clara's head on Jonah's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow to normal rhythm. She felt different, not in the dramatic way stories suggested, but in a subtle shifting of self-perception. She was a wife now, truly and completely, this man's partner in every sense. "Are you all right?" Jonah asked quietly, his hand stroking her hair. "Yes. Better than all right, actually." Clara propped herself up to look at him. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for trusting me." He pulled her back down against his chest. "Get some sleep, Clara. Tomorrow the real work begins." She smiled in the darkness, feeling sleep pull at her. Tomorrow she would begin learning to truly manage this household, would start building routines and rhythms, would step fully into her role as Mrs. Jonah Mercer. But tonight, she was simply a woman held safe in her husband's arms, finally belonging somewhere after 7 years of not belonging anywhere at all. Clara woke before dawn, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar room and the warm presence beside her. Then memory flooded back. The wedding, the ride home, the night spent learning her new husband's body and having him learn hers. She was married. She was home. She was Clara Mercer. Beside her, Jonah still slept, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen while he was awake. Clara studied him in the gray pre-dawn light, this man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who'd seen strength where others saw only failure. She felt a surge of fierce protectiveness toward him, mixed with gratitude so intense it bordered on pain. She would make this work. She would prove to everyone, including herself, that she deserved this chance. She would build a life here that mattered, that meant something, that transformed her from the rejected woman on a platform to someone essential and valued. The first weeks of marriage passed in a blur of learning and adjustment. Clara threw herself into mastering the household, working alongside Cookie to understand the rhythms of feeding 30 hungry men, learning which cowboys needed gentle handling and which responded better to firm direction. She studied the ranch's account books with Jonah in the evenings, gradually understanding the financial complexity of the operation. She rode every day, building strength and confidence until she could handle Rosie across any terrain. There were difficult moments, times when Clara felt overwhelmed by the sheer scope of her responsibilities, when she questioned whether she was truly capable of managing everything expected of her. Times when cowboys tested her authority, seeing if the new boss's wife could be pushed around or manipulated. Times when loneliness hit hard despite being constantly surrounded by people, when she missed the simplicity of being responsible only for herself. But each time doubt threatened, Claire remembered standing on that platform, remembered being passed over 7 times, remembered the alternative she'd escaped. And she dug deeper, found reserves of strength and determination she hadn't known she possessed, and kept going. Jonah was true to his word about partnership. He included her in decisions, sought her opinion on matters both large and small, and treated her as a genuine equal rather than subordinate. When she struggled, he helped without taking over. When she succeeded, he acknowledged it without excessive praise, just simple recognition that she'd done what needed doing. Their physical relationship deepened as comfort replaced nervousness. Claire discovered that intimacy could be both pleasure and connection, a way of communicating things that words couldn't capture. Jonah was an attentive lover, learning what she liked and what she didn't, always checking that she was comfortable and willing. In turn, Claire grew bolder, more confident in expressing her own desires, building with him the kind of genuine partnership that extended even into their bedroom. By midwinter, Clara had established herself firmly as the ranch's mistress. The hands respected her. Cookie collaborated with her as an equal, and even the occasional visitors from town had stopped questioning Jonah's choice and started acknowledging that Clara Mercer was exactly what the Triple Creek Ranch needed. One February evening, 8 months after the wedding, Clara sat in the ranch office helping Jonah review the year's accounts. Snow fell steadily outside, blanketing the world in white silence, but inside the house was warm and bright, lamplight casting golden shadows on the walls. "We did well this year," Jonah said, leaning back in his chair. "Better than I projected. Cattle prices held strong, and we only lost a dozen head over winter. That's excellent." "Cookie says the hands are happier than they've been in years," Clara added. "Better food, better organization, fewer complaints. That helps productivity." "That's you. That's your influence." Jonah studied her across the desk. "Clara, I need to tell you something." She looked up, hearing the seriousness in his tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. The opposite, actually." He stood, moving around the desk to lean against it in front of her. "When I chose you on that platform, I thought I was making a smart, practical decision, getting a capable partner who could help me run this ranch and wouldn't expect romantic nonsense I wasn't capable of providing." Clara felt her heart begin to pound, uncertain where this was leading. "But somewhere over these past months," Jonah continued, "it stopped being just practical. Somewhere between watching you stand up to Margaret Hastings and seeing you comfort a homesick cowboy and finding you in the barn at midnight checking on a sick horse because you heard it coughing, somewhere in all of that, Clara, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, enormous and impossible and wonderful. "I know that wasn't part of our agreement," Jonah said quickly. "I know we married for partnership and practicality, but I can't keep pretending that's all this is anymore. You're not just my partner, Clara. You're the woman I wake up grateful for every morning, the woman I want to build every part of my future with, the woman I love." Clara stood on shaking legs, years of rejection and fear warring with the tentative hope blooming in her chest. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I just needed you to know." "I love you too," Clara interrupted, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been so scared to even think it because I didn't want to complicate what we built. But Jonah, you're not just my husband or my partner. You're the man who saw me when I was invisible, who made me believe I was worth something, who gave me not just a home but a purpose. How could I not love you?" Jonah pulled her into his arms, and they stood there in the lamplight, holding each other as snow fell outside and fire crackled in the hearth. 8 months ago, Clara had been a desperate woman on a platform, passed over and unwanted. Now she was loved, genuinely, deeply loved, by a man she respected and cherished in return. "Thank you for being late that day," Clara whispered against his chest. Jonah laughed softly. "Thank you for not giving up after 7 rejections. Thank you for being strong enough and stubborn enough to keep trying until I finally found you." That spring, Clara started something she'd been planning for months. Using money Jonah allocated from the ranch profits and donations from several town families, she opened a small school in an unused ranch building. Children from neighboring ranches and town families who couldn't afford regular schooling began attending, learning, reading, and arithmetic and history from the woman who'd once been rejected as unsuitable to teach. The school became Clara's special project, her way of giving back to a community that had accepted her despite initial skepticism. She taught during mornings and early afternoons, then returned to household duties, somehow managing both without neglecting either. Jonah helped when he could, reviewing her lesson plans and offering suggestions, proud of what she was building. By the school's second year, it had grown to 20 students and needed additional space. The community came together to build a proper schoolhouse halfway between the ranch and town, with Clara as the permanent teacher. She still managed the ranch household, but with help now. A young woman named Sarah from town who'd proven capable and reliable. 5 years after that day on the platform, Clara sat in her schoolhouse watching children bent over their slates, practicing their letters. Outside, spring sunshine warmed the earth, and through the window she could see the ranch in the distance, her home, her life, the foundation of everything she'd built. She touched the sapphire ring on her finger, still marveling sometimes at how drastically life could change in a single moment. One man arriving late, one choice made against all conventional wisdom, one woman refusing to give up despite overwhelming evidence that she should. That evening, Clara rode home through the spring twilight, muscles pleasantly tired from a full day's work. Jonah met her in the yard, taking Rosie's reins and helping Clara dismount with hands that knew her body as well as she knew his. "Good day?" he asked, kissing her forehead. "Excellent day." Tommy Chen finally mastered long division, and Mary Hutchins read an entire page without stumbling once. "Oh, that's my brilliant wife," pride filled Jonah's voice. "Come on, Cookie made your favorite for dinner." They walked into the house together, Jonah's arm around Clara's shoulders, fitting together with the ease of long practice and deep affection. Inside, warmth and lamplight and the smell of good food welcomed them. Home, in every sense of the word. Later that night, lying in their bed with Jonah's arms around her and moonlight streaming through the window, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. 7 platforms, 7 rejections, 7 times she'd picked herself up and tried again because the alternative was worse than the pain of failure. Every rejection had felt like the end of hope. Every time she'd been passed over, she'd believed herself worthless, broken, destined for invisibility and slow fading, but she'd been wrong. The rejections hadn't been endings. They'd been clearings, removing obstacles, pushing her forward, ensuring she stood on that specific platform on that specific day when Jonah Mercer rode in late and dusty and chose the woman everyone else had dismissed. She'd thought she was unwanted. In truth, she'd simply been waiting to be seen by the one person whose vision mattered. And when he finally saw her, really saw her, not as a consolation or a last resort, but as exactly what he needed, everything changed. Not just her circumstances, but her understanding of her own worth, her own strength, her own capacity to build something meaningful from the ruins of repeated failure. Clara had gone from the rejected woman on a platform to the woman who changed everything: children educated, a ranch thriving, a community strengthened, love built from honesty and respect, and daily choosing to stand together. Looking back now from the safety of home and love and purpose, she understood the truth that had eluded her during those years of struggle. She had never been unwanted. She'd simply been waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right opportunity to show the world exactly what she was capable of becoming. And when that moment came, she'd been ready. Brave enough to say yes, strong enough to build something real, wise enough to recognize that being chosen for exactly who you are is worth infinitely more than being selected for who someone wishes you could be. Clara pulled Jonah closer, feeling his breathing slow into sleep, and smiled into the darkness. 7 rejections had led her here, to this man, this home, this life that mattered far more than any of the lives she'd imagined during those years of desperate platform standing. She'd been tested by fire and refined by rejection, and what emerged was a woman strong enough to deserve the life she'd been given, strong enough to build a legacy that would last long after she was gone, strong enough, finally, to believe she'd always been worth choosing. She just needed to wait for someone wise enough to see it. And she had. The end.